Chapter 296. The arrival of Longcheng Ting Shui made the palace lively again. The emperor specially set up a banquet to welcome her arrival. Because as long as she married, the cooperation between Dai Yu state and Lu Yi would be half completed. Even the empress lamented that the palace had been too lively recently. There were princes and princesses. She was so busy worrying about the banquet almost every day. And this palace banquet was also very particular. She didn't know what Gong Dai said to Gong Cheng, but he actually didn't insist on Gong Dai marrying Princess Lu Yi. Therefore, today's banquet was to let the princess see the sons of Dai Yu state. Although there weren't many princes of the right age, there were many sons of other nobles and ministers. When Gong Yimo found out about this, she heaved a sigh of relief. As long as the emperor didn't grant a marriage, this little princess might not choose Gong Dai. Before the banquet, the empress smiled and told Longcheng Ting Shui about this under the emperor's orders. Longcheng Ting Shui blushed, but a trace of coldness flashed in her eyes. What else was there to choose? Wasn't Gong Dai the most suitable prince? Or did the emperor not want her to marry Gong Dai, so he arranged this banquet for her to choose someone else? But no matter how dissatisfied she was, she wouldn't show it. In any case, Gong Dai would definitely appear. If the emperor didn't grant a marriage, she would personally choose a husband. It wasn't a big deal. Thinking of this, she smiled at the empress and said that she would perform a dance tonight. At that time, if she liked someone, she would hint to the empress. The empress smiled and nodded, thinking that Lu Yi's customs were indeed different from Dai Yu states. As they talked, it was time for the banquet. Because the emperor had released the news that anyone who came would have a chance to win the favor of Princess Lu Yi, those who were interested were very active. Gong Yimo rubbed her stomach and complained to herself at the palace gate, "There have been too many banquets recently. I feel that my waist is fat." At this time, Gong Dai had unknowingly appeared behind her. The moment they passed, he said, "Are you fat? But to my touch, it still feels very slender." Gong Yimo was shocked. Seeing that there was no one around, she glared fiercely at Gong Dai. "You talk too much." Then, he ran in first. Gong Dai smiled and followed him in. Gong Dai had a lot of things on his mind recently because Kim Yoon still hadn't given him an answer. It must have something to do with what happened that night. But it didn't matter. He would get the contract eventually. It was just a pity that he couldn't see Royal Sister so often. It was really a pity. Halfway through the banquet, just when the atmosphere was at its peak, Princess Lu Yi finally made her appearance. The main event that they had been waiting for had finally arrived. She took off her gorgeous cloak, revealing a red dance dress underneath. This attracted the attention of everyone present, and most of them revealed a covetous look. Longcheng Ting Shui pursed her lips and smiled, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for setting up this banquet for Ting Shui. Ting Shui has just arrived and has nothing to thank you for. I can only dance to express my sincerity." Gong Cheng knew that this little princess had made her appearance now. She must have already chosen her partner. He swept his gaze across the hall. There were more than a dozen unmarried princes, as well as the sons of ministers and nobles. It was reasonable to say that this little princess shouldn't have recognized anyone beforehand, so he didn't know who she would choose as her husband. Since Princess Lu Yi is on the stage, it is everyone's blessing. But we also don't know what the princess likes. So, everyone will take out a beloved object. Later, when the princess finishes her performance, she can take away the object she likes. As an addition, we will also reward you. The emperor's meaning was too clear. He clearly said that whoever the princess liked, she could take away his object as a token of love. Moreover, this little princess was beautiful and seemed to have a good personality. She was also very favored by Lu Yi. Marrying her was really not a loss. Therefore, when the palace servant walked in front of someone holding the red silk, everyone took out their most precious object and placed it on top. Then, the eunuchs announced it, such as so-and-so jade pendant. The little princess stood there smiling the whole time, as if she didn't mind. But she still had to pay attention to a few important people. Especially when the palace servant walked in front of Gong Yimo, she took a second look. Gong Yimo was the only woman in the hall except for the imperial concubines. If she accidentally took their things, What would the emperor do if he thought that she didn't like any of them? So she had to avoid it. Then, she saw Gong Yimo casually pull out a hairpin from her hair and put it on the tray. She suddenly felt indignant. Just how much did she not put her in her eyes? But after Gong Yimo, it was Gong Dai's turn. She looked over expectantly and saw him put a dragon-shaped jade pendant on the tray. Although it was only a quick glance, she still saw that the jade pendant's color was very good. It was obviously not cheap. The little princess lowered her head in relief. She felt that Gong Dai might not be completely uninterested in her. Soon, everyone offered up their most precious things and then waited for the result. When the palace music sounded, the little princess danced Lu Yi's unique fast-paced dance. When she danced, her entire person looked very lively. Those bright eyes and the blush on her face made the single men present very excited. If they could really marry Lu Yi's princess, that would be great. Thinking like this, they all put on their best manners, hoping to be chosen by the other party. After all, the emperor didn't decree a marriage and even held such a banquet. It was clear that he was letting the princess choose herself. They all had a chance. Long Cheng's Ting Shui spun among the dancers like stars surrounding the moon. Her red sleeves fluttered and her dance steps were cheerful. She really gained the favor of many men. So when she stopped, the applause didn't stop. Long Cheng's Ting Shui was slightly panting. The emperor took the lead to praise and smiled mischievously. Let's not talk about my reward first. Come, little princess, take a look at these treasures. Is there one you like? When the emperor said this, the palace servants quickly handed over 3 trays full of treasures. Long Cheng's Ting Shui had a confident smile on her face. No matter how special the other things were, she didn't care and directly went to find the things that Gong Dai took out. Everyone became nervous. Some people even raised their necks to look. The emperor and empress looked at each other and smiled because they knew that as long as Princess Lu Yi chose the things that were put in, then she had the heart to marry that person. Although they didn't want to be too obvious and put all the treasures together, they all knew that as long as the princess had the heart, she would definitely know which one was put in by her sweetheart. Who would she choose? Gong Yimo watched with her chin in her hand. She felt lucky that the emperor didn't decree a marriage and used this method to let the princess choose her husband. However, the situation now was also very dangerous. After all, Gong Dai was so handsome. At this time, she turned her head and found Gong Dai's calm appearance. It was as if he wasn't worried that she would choose him. Gong Yimo couldn't help but feel strange. You say, whose things will she choose? Chapter 297. Who would she choose? Long Cheng Ting Shui's gaze swept through the items one by one, a smile on her lips. Her goal was clear, there was only one item. At this moment, her eyes suddenly lit up, and she stretched out her hand. Her action made many people's hearts tighten, they even held their breath. But her movements suddenly stopped. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she was a little panicked. Everyone waited anxiously, wondering what she was going to do. The distance was too far, the emperor couldn't see which item she was going to take. She clearly came out to dance, so she must have chosen. Why did it seem like she was hesitating now? But at this time, Long Chengting Shui's forehead was covered in cold sweat. Under her finger was that dragon-shaped jade pendant. But who could tell her, why was there an identical dragon-shaped jade pendant under this jade pendant? Time passed by minute, and the hall became restless. Many people wanted to know who she would choose, but why was she hesitating for so long? Could it be that she didn't like any of them? Even Emperor Gong thought so. In order to let Princess Lu Yi off the stage, he laughed and said, "It doesn't matter if you don't like any of them. I have other rewards." How could she not like any of them? If the emperor held such a banquet again, these people would definitely not be here. Then how could she choose Gong Dai? She gritted her teeth. The next step was to bet on her luck. The 2 jade pendants were exactly the same, she didn't believe that others could tell them apart. So she held the dragon pendant tightly in her hand, and said with a forced smile, "Your Majesty, Ting Shui has chosen." Emperor Gong smiled. "Whose treasure is it?" At this moment, a eunuch on the side stepped forward to take a look. "Your Majesty, this is your dragon pendant." That one sentence was earth-shattering. The Empress was stunned, and then filled with anger. Emperor Gong was stunned, only feeling baffled. All the men present were stunned. They didn't expect such a delicate little girl to like the Emperor in his 40s or 50s. They couldn't help but glance at Emperor Gong. Indeed, Emperor Gong was a handsome uncle, but no matter what, he was old enough to be the father of a little princess. Gong Yimo spat out a mouthful of wine. Fortunately, no one was paying attention to them. Gong Dai smiled and handed over the handkerchief. "Royal sister, you're too careless." Gong Yimo raised her head and looked into Gong Dai's pitch-black eyes. She suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. She was 100% sure that Gong Dai did it on purpose. He must have known about the Emperor's plan and prepared for it. That was why he could take whatever the Emperor took out. The eunuchs in the palace must have been bribed by him. Even if that piece of land really belonged to Gong Dai, the eunuchs would say that it belonged to the Emperor. He was too two-faced. Gong Yimo felt uncomfortable being stared at by his deep eyes. She quickly sat up straight and watched the show, ignoring him. The Emperor's first thought was, could this be Lu Yi's scheme? But there was no need to sacrifice a princess. But after hearing the eunuch's words, Long Cheng's Ting Shui was the one who was affected the most. Why was it the Emperor's? It was obviously Gong Dai's. At this time, the jade pendant in her hand was burning hot, making her want to throw it away, but she couldn't do that. If she didn't explain it clearly, not only would the Empress see her as a thorn in her side, but the Emperor would also be on guard against her. So even if it was shameful, she had to explain it clearly. Therefore, she took a deep breath. This is His Majesty's. Ting Shui thought. Her eyes immediately turned red, making people guess that there was something else. After all, they were all put together. Maybe the princess remembered it wrongly. Only then did Gong Cheng feel a little better. He smiled stiffly. So, the princess chose the wrong one? Long Cheng's Ting Shui gritted her teeth and nodded gently. She looked so innocent that even the Empress's hostility towards her lessened a little. After all, if Gong Che didn't have an engagement, she would hope to have Lu Yi's most favored princess as a daughter-in-law. Ting Shui didn't choose the wrong one. It's just that there are 2 jade pendants. When she said this, the Emperor quickly frowned and looked at Gong Dai, then said to the eunuch, "Bring it up." He looked and found that there was actually another identical jade pendant. This Gong Dai was really getting bolder. Not only did he deliberately make Princess Lu Yi lose face, but he also schemed against him. What did he want to do? Gong Dai, tell me, what is going on here? The Emperor was obviously angry. No one dared to speak, and Long Cheng's Ting Shui also shut her mouth. She thought very well. If Gong Dai was going to be punished by the Emperor, she would plead for leniency and strive to leave a good impression on him. Gong Dai slightly raised his eyebrows, walked out, and bowed to the Emperor. "Father, why are you so angry?" Gong Cheng was so angry that he threw the jade pendant on the ground. "Did you do it on purpose to confuse Princess Lu Yi? You're clearly bullying people by doing this." Gong Dai coldly looked at the broken jade pendant on the ground. Since he knew about the Emperor's plan, he had been doing this. He deliberately bribed the eunuch to let the Emperor wear this jade pendant today. When it was time to take out the treasure, he would definitely take out this jade pendant if he didn't have anything else on him. He had an identical jade pendant. He also thought that the Emperor would be angry, but what did it matter? He bent down and picked up the broken jade pendant piece by piece and whispered, "Imperial Father just said that we should put in our most beloved treasure. And the origin of this jade pendant, does Imperial Father remember? It was too long ago, but when Gong Dai mentioned it, Gong Cheng suddenly remembered. At that time, he brought people to hunt and encountered a fierce tiger. It was Gong Dai who saved him, and Gong Dai was injured because of it, almost crippling one of his hands. He was moved for a moment. After Gong Dai recovered, he gave him a pair of dragon pendants. Both father and son wore the same jade pendant, which could be considered as a show of favor to him, and it was this jade pendant. He came back to his senses, shocked and regretful. Gong Dai had already stood up. He didn't have any expression, and his words were cold and cheerless, as if he wasn't sad at all. Perhaps Imperial Father has a lot of such jade pendants, but this son only has one. It represents some memories that I don't want to forget. It's this son's most beloved thing. He held the broken jade pendant in his hand and lightly added, but if Imperial Father thinks that I did it on purpose, then just smash it. His words didn't complain, but every word and sentence hit Gong Cheng's heart, making him feel regret and hate himself for being so impulsive just now. Didn't this hurt this child's heart? Gong Dai was a person who kept everything in his heart. He was so calm at this time, but his action of picking up the broken jade pendant showed how sad he was at this time. Chapter 298. Long Cheng's Ting Shui didn't expect that. She didn't even need to use the excuse she had prepared. The enraged emperor was convinced by Gong Ju's words. Because of the memories of the past, he showed a look of pity for Gong Ju. But what should she do? Emperor Gong sighed, "It's my fault. My jade pendant. I'll bestow it to you." Gong Dai glanced at the jade pendant in Long Cheng's Ting Shui's hand and smiled. "No need, Father Emperor. Since the princess took the jade pendant, it belongs to the princess." After saying that, he went straight back to his seat, hiding his merit and fame. Long Cheng's Ting Shui really wanted to cry. At this time, the emperor said, "Since the princess made the wrong choice, it doesn't matter. There are still so many treasures. The princess might as well choose again." When he said this, his heart was filled with guilt. Originally, he had some thoughts and hoped that Long Cheng's Ting Shui would choose Gong Dai. However, Gong Dai was so unwilling that he directly rejected the jade pendant in her hand. Coupled with the guilt of remembering the past, he couldn't help but think that since Gong Dai wasn't willing, then forget it. He couldn't force himself to treat his son sincerely because of an outsider. Long Cheng's Ting Shui felt a great humiliation. Unfortunately, the envoys who came with her did not know what she was thinking. They even thought that the great Yu Emperor was giving them face. After the princess made such a big mistake, he still allowed her to choose one more time. Choosing a female and choosing a male twice was already giving them face. But Long Cheng's Ting Shui was different. The emperor wanted to bestow the jade pendant in her hand to Gong Dai, but Gong Dai directly rejected it. This clearly showed that he had no interest in her and ruthlessly slapped her face. At this time, if she continued to pester endlessly and said that she wanted to choose Gong Dai, then she would really be embarrassed. But now that she had to choose again, how could she be willing? There were so many things on the tray, and the only one that belonged to Gong Dai was smashed by the emperor. But when the others heard that she had to choose again, they raised their heads in anticipation again. However, he didn't expect that the princess standing in the middle of the hall would roll her eyes. She fainted. Emperor Gong was shocked and hurriedly called for the imperial physician. Lu Yi's envoys also ran over. In an instant, the main hall was in chaos. Seeing this, Gong Yimo couldn't help but be impressed. It was really clever. If she didn't want to choose, she could pretend to faint. Not only could she avoid a disaster, she could also make the emperor feel guilty towards her. She had learned this move. At this time, the banquet could not continue. Gong Dai was also called away by the emperor. Gong Yimo thought about it and decided to go out of the palace to look for Kim Yoon. During this period of time, Kim Yoon and Gong Dai's cooperation had been unable to come to an agreement. She was actually very anxious. After all, this matter was caused by her, so it was better for her to resolve it. After all, these were two separate matters. How could he mix state affairs with private matters? But just as she was about to leave, Gong Che came over. He looked at Gong Yimo and revealed a gentle smile. "Imperial sister, do you have time to go for a walk?" His invitation made Gong Yimo somewhat surprised. Recently, Gong Che had been very busy and did not express anything strange to her. This made her more and more believe that Gong Che had really let it go. Thus, her attitude towards him gradually returned to how it was before, without a trace of estrangement. "Of course I can." She smiled and walked towards the imperial garden with Gong Che. The moon tonight was very bright and faint, with a trace of coldness. Gong Che dismissed all his attendants and walked with Gong Yimo in a beautiful plum garden. The plum blossoms had all bloomed. Looking at the flowers under the moon really had a different artistic conception. Gong Yimo went forward and sniffed. There was a faint fragrance. A beauty looking at the flowers did not know that she was also a beautiful scenery. Especially looking at a beauty under the moon, the more you looked, the more beautiful she was. Gongche could not help but smile. He really felt that he was very easy to satisfy. As long as he could walk quietly with her, it was already something that he yearned for day and night. When he loved her to the extreme, sometimes he even wished that he could forget her. Because seeing that he could not have her was so painful. But he could not bear to. If he persevered and could have her one day, how could he bear to give up? Seeing that Gongche was quiet and not saying anything, Gong Yimo turned to look at him and asked in surprise. Crown Prince Gidge, didn't you have something to tell me? What is it? Gongche then gathered his thoughts. He thought of something and could not help but smile. I wanted to tell you that the medicine you gave me is effective. Not only was it effective, but he would recover in a few days. So when he talked about this matter, the deep affection in his eyes seemed to be about to explode, but he held it in. He was too happy. Mo was his lucky star. Because of her, he had everything. Now, even the only problem was solved by her. He really wanted to kiss her and thank her. When Gong Yimo heard this, she was also very surprised. It's effective. When will you recover? She took a few steps closer and looked at him from left to right. That pair of beautiful eyes was brighter than the moon in the sky. Moa. Gongche could not hold back anymore and hugged her. Gong Yimo was shocked, but he hugged her even tighter. Thank you, Moa. I'm too happy. I simply don't know how to thank you. He thought of how his mother had worried so much in order to hide his illness. He thought of how he had restrained himself so that it would not be exposed. He never dared to eat spicy food, salty food, angry, or agitated. People looked at him and thought that he was born with a good temper. Who knew that he could not be bad even if he wanted to? This was not enough. He also had to be afraid. Once someone found out, it was very likely that he would be stripped of his position as the crown prince. But now there was no need. He had Moa and his illness was almost cured. He no longer had any worries. His only thought was her. Only she. Feeling that Gongche was really excited, Gong Yimo could not help but think of her previous life. At that time, Gongche had just recovered. He was also very happy. A man who was almost 30 years old pulled her and jumped around without any care for his image. Those past events. She patted his back. Perhaps in this life, she would not be emotionally involved with him again. But seeing him so happy, it could be considered as fulfilling one of her regrets in her previous life. Because in her previous life, she had always wanted him to be well. She wanted to give the best of everything to him. In the end, she did it, but missed it. Later on, she was betrayed and died. It was not that she did not hate him. But in this life, she had a chance to redeem herself. Why should she not let go of others? It was understandable for people in this world to think for themselves. As long as they did not offend her, she did not have the time to be entangled with the grudges from her previous life. So it was fine as long as other people had a good ending and did not get in her way. Hugging Gong Yimo and seeing her quietly being hugged by him, Gongche felt that this happiness was even stronger than being cured of his illness. The faint sweet fragrance stimulated every single one of his nerves. His arms were wrapped around her, tightly. His Adam's apple moved. Could he kiss her? Chapter 299. Gong Yimo sighed. Crown Prince Gidge, this is all I can do for you. If you are really grateful to me, then in the future, it will be enough for you to become a good emperor who loves his people like his own children. Gongche hugged her. In fact, he really wanted to tell her that there were still many things she could do for him. You still have yourself. He sniffed her hair and his eyes turned red. If only he was the emperor, then he could openly hug her. It wouldn't be like now where he had to think twice before kissing her. It wouldn't be like now where he didn't even dare to express his feelings. I really want her. She is in my arms. Why can't I have her? I am the crown prince. If I become a good emperor in the future. Gongche's voice was muffled, but his heart was beating very fast. This made Gong Yimo mistakenly think that he was still excited about his illness and didn't think of anything else. If I become a good emperor, will you love me? Just like how I love you. Moa. Gong Yimo felt a little strange. Since she hugged him, it was enough to comfort him. Therefore, she patted Gong Che's back, indicating for him to let go. All right, Crown Prince Gidge. You will be a good emperor in the future. At night, she couldn't see the changes in Gong Che's eyes. Therefore, Gong Che could boldly look at her passionately and reluctantly let go of her. He had to endure. He had to endure to the extreme. Moa was already very good to him. He couldn't force her, at least not now. Even if he wanted to force her, it should be when she couldn't escape anymore. The two continued to stroll through the forest and talk. It had to be said that this kind of feeling was very good. Oh right, Crown Prince Gidge, Su Miaolan has removed her clothes. Are you going to get married? Gong Che was suddenly asked this question. For a moment, he couldn't remember who Su Miaolan was. After all, his heart couldn't hold anyone else. However, this name also resounded like thunder in his ears, because recently, everyone around him had been urging him. Even his mother almost thought that he was impotent, and sent many women to investigate the situation. But, he really didn't want to get married, and even if he did, he would never touch her. Gong Che looked at Gong Yimo's side profile in a daze. He wanted to keep himself clean, and besides Moa, he was not interested in anyone else. But now that Su Miaolan's service had been removed, what should he do to get rid of her? But he was old, and he had no choice but to get married. If only he was the same age as Gong Dai. Or was he really going to marry her and leave her alone? Gong Yimo had also thought it through. In any case, Su Miaolan wouldn't have the opportunity to do anything to her in this life. If she wanted to get married, then so be it. Although she wouldn't congratulate her, she also wouldn't cause trouble. But seeing that Gong Che was silent, she asked, Brother Crown Prince? En. Gong Che returned to his senses and patted her head. Let's not talk about her. He didn't want to talk about other women in front of Moa. Back then, he said that he wanted to marry her, but it was only a temporary measure. Now that it had been delayed for 3 years, it was a pity that his relationship with Moa still didn't improve. Gong Yimo nodded, and the two chatted about other things until the sky turned dark. Gong Yimo was tired, and directly went to Taiji Palace to rest. Looking at Gong Yimo's departing figure, Gong Che asked himself in his heart. He also didn't want to love her like that, but why did he love her like that? The next day, the weather was gloomy. Early in the morning, someone came to visit her in the palace. Gong Yimo rubbed her eyes. Although she had already washed up, she was still a little sleepy. Looking at a certain someone who came to report to Taiji Palace so early in the morning, although she felt guilty towards him, she was still dispirited and listless. Kim Yoon, why are you here so early? She hadn't seen him for a while, and Kim Yoon had lost a lot of weight. It seemed like he still couldn't get over what happened that day. Gong Yimo sighed inwardly. What was going on? It wasn't easy for Brother Crown Prince to let go of her, and now Kim Yoon was here. Kim Yoon's face was exquisite and enchanting, but at this moment, the mole at the corner of his eye that was brimming with tears seemed to be on the verge of falling, and he looked a little sad. Moa, are you really so heartless? I've been in Dayu state for so many days, but you didn't even come to see me once. Gong Yimo's mouth twitched. Why did it feel like she was a heartless person? And she didn't seem to have done anything wrong to Kim Yoon, right? Wasn't it all because of his sudden confession? Otherwise, she would have gone to look for Kim Yoon a few days ago to have a drink and catch up, but now it was so awkward. Kim Yoon, let's put it this way. Although I'm always rude to you, in my heart, I still see you as an older brother. We've depended on each other for so many years. Couldn't you lay your hands on someone else? She wanted to say this half-jokingly, but at this moment, Kim Yoon suddenly laughed. His laugh was so bitter that Gong Yimo couldn't bear to continue speaking. At that moment, she, who was so heartless, actually felt that it was cruel. Do you know that calling me older brother is even more painful than rejecting me? He laughed as his gaze traced her face bit by bit, but the words that came out of his mouth were filled with sarcasm. You say that you see me as an older brother, but how do you treat your younger brother? Would you treat me the same way? Gong Yimo's face turned pale. She wanted to say that she was forced that night, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. If she was so heartless, who could force her? But her expression gave Kim Yoon a glimmer of hope. You want to say that you're not willing? His eyes suddenly lit up. I knew it. I knew you wouldn't be so easily moved. Gong Yimmo's lips moved. Was she moved? This question seemed wrong no matter how she answered. Why do you think so? Gong Yimmo was a little helpless. Whether she was moved or not, or whether she was willing or not, to put it cruelly, had nothing to do with Kim Yoon. At this moment, Kim Yoon's eyes revealed a trace of a bitter smile. Because my Moa is the most heartless person. Gong Yimmo was stunned. She looked at him with her eyes wide open, as if she didn't understand what he meant. Kim Yoon smiled slightly with a little helplessness. Moa, you're heartless. You're good to others, but you're good to everyone. If you really want to choose a difference from all these good things, perhaps the longer you've known you, the better you treat them. His words made Gong Yimmo speechless, but there was a huge wave in her heart. Could it be that what she valued about Gong Dai was the fact that they grew up together? You seem to have feelings, but you're the most heartless. Your heart can hold the sea of stars, but it can't hold a relationship. This is also another reason why I didn't dare to express my feelings back then. You're powerful, very powerful, but when it comes to relationships, you're like a coward. You retreat when you can, hide when you can. I was afraid that you'd leave, so I didn't say it. Chapter 300. Gong Yimmo didn't expect that there was such a reason behind it. But was he right? Gong Yimmo thought about it carefully and realized that Kim Yoon really knew her well. She was a coward when it came to relationships, but she couldn't say that. She was just afraid of trouble. She was afraid of being betrayed after giving her body and soul. She was afraid of being dragged into relationships and tormented by them. She was afraid of being mentally and physically exhausted. She would rather not have love in this world. Instead of looking for trouble and being entangled in relationships, she could do a lot of things. Besides, was there really love in this world? She sneered. Among those successful people, how many of them were in their 30s or 40s? How could they say I love you to their wedded couples? Good things were kinship. Bad things could be enemies. Thinking of this, Gong Yimmo shook her head. Seriously, she was going down a dead end again. Perhaps there was such undying love in this world, but she didn't think that it would befall her. It was like a tempting candy. She might be fine if she didn't take it, but once she took it and opened the candy happily, what if it was poison inside? Who could say for sure that people's hearts were unpredictable? Since you know me so well. Gong Yimmo felt that her throat was a little dry. She paused and looked into his eyes calmly and confusedly. Since you know me so well, why are you still here? Why are you still here? Her words were cold and cruel, but it was also the truth. If Kim Yoon knew that she wouldn't be moved and wouldn't fall in love, why did he take this step? Wasn't it better to be like before? Kim Yoon smiled bitterly. Do you still remember what you said to me in the past? Gong Yimmo looked up at him. She had said many things to him, but she didn't know which one he was referring to. Kim Yoon's gaze fell elsewhere, revealing his perfect side profile. In the past, no matter what I did, I failed time and time again until I was in despair and didn't have the strength to repeat it again. You would smile and tell me to do it again. Maybe there will be a miracle. Gong Yimmo suddenly panicked. At this time, he had already held Gong Yimmo's hand on the table. I know it's hard to move you. I also know that you won't be moved by anyone. But what if? What if there is a miracle? If I don't insist, I won't have a chance, so I insist. You can reject me once, 100 or 1,000 times, I just want a chance. Just a chance. I'm not worth it. Gong Yimmo was frightened and tried to pull her hand back. You are. Jin Yoon's eyes were burning. You're worth it. Do you still remember back then? It was you who saved my dignity. I was exchanged for 1,000 horses by my father. It was you who saved me from that disgusting man. Uristitis rebuild SSSS saved my face. There was a light S, there was a light. There was ATSSSTSSTS this RSSSTSS at that time, you used this. You caught my daggers. At that moment, You actually grabbed my heart and never let go. Gong Yimo suddenly stood up and took a few steps back. She looked at Kim Yoon as if he was some kind of monster. Are you afraid? Are you trying to escape? You took my heart so easily. Why can't you share it with me? He also stood up. It could be said that this was the first time he was so aggressive. But he had no choice. If he didn't force her, she wouldn't face her feelings. He wanted her to see it clearly. See it clearly. So, he walked towards Gong Yimo step by step. Then, he took out a small brocade box from his chest. Gong Yimo remembered this box. On the night when Yuheng was found, she danced for him. At that time, he wanted to take out this box. The box was opened. Inside, there was a ring. Kim Yoon smiled. I don't know what the ring you're talking about looks like. It doesn't seem romantic now. But I want to be with you. I've already missed you once. I won't miss you a second time. Moa, will you marry me? Gong Yimo put her hands behind her back. Her eyes were wide open. She was very scared. She didn't know what to do with this situation. Why did he suddenly propose? What did he mean by already missed me once? Could he not say these things to her? Her head was hurting. Kim Yoon, I think you need to calm down. Maybe in a few years, you'll feel that the things that you find hard to accept now are nothing. Kim Yoon suddenly looked at her with a smile. Moa. So you don't know about feelings. But I'm willing to teach you. I must marry you. Seeing that he was walking towards her step by step, Gong Yimo's originally panicked face suddenly sank. There was a trace of fear and anger. Stop. Kim Yoon saw that her face was very pale and hesitated. Stand there and don't move. She closed her eyes and held her forehead. She said quickly, since you said that I don't have a heart and don't have feelings, then I'll add a few more words. I don't want to get married, I don't want to love, I don't want to. She seemed to have been forced to the end. This was the first time she spoke to Kim Yoon in such a resentful tone. She was a little flustered and exasperated, but her voice was trembling towards the end. At this moment, she suddenly raised her head. The coldness in her gaze forced Kim Yoon to take a step back. Waiting for a miracle? There won't be a miracle on me, so don't waste your energy. This was a dead knot that she had formed in her previous life. She could see through everything and didn't even care about hatred. But she still remembered the pain she had suffered. She wouldn't provoke him, all right? Kim Yoon's face turned snow-white in an instant. He almost couldn't hold the brocade box in his hand. Gong Yimo suddenly hugged her head and squatted down. Her voice was sobbing. Can't you just let me go? I don't want it. Don't force me. I don't want it. She shrank back like a hedgehog. Kim Yoon's heart softened. He endured the pain in his heart and squatted down as well, comforting her in a low voice. Okay. I won't force you. Don't be afraid, okay? It was Kim Yoon's bad luck. First it was Gong Chae, then it was Gong Dai, and now he was interfering. Gong Yimo was forced to do things that she was afraid of time and time again. Last time at the waterside corridor, when she faced Gong Dai, she exploded. This time, it was even more serious. What was wrong with her? Did she have to get married before she could be at peace? Kim Yoon immediately withdrew his deterrence. He was a little nervous as he coaxed her. A trace of pity flashed across his eyes. Moa. Actually, there's something I didn't say. You don't have a heart. But that night, your feelings for Gong Dai were actually wavering. If that's the case, then what about me? If it's me, can I? Chapter 301. Snowflakes fluttered in the sky, but it couldn't dampen the enthusiasm of the people. The long-awaited ceremony was finally here. The ceremony was held at the source of the Soaring Dragon River, the sacred place of Dayu State, the broken stairway to heaven. The broken stairway to heaven was a cliff. The surface was very smooth, as if it had been neatly trimmed. The reason why it was called the stairway to heaven was because the cliff that extended from the ground wasn't vertical. Instead, it was like a giant staircase, with a total of 9 steps. Legend had it that this was the place where the gods ascended to heaven. The 9 steps to heaven were a miracle left behind by the gods. At the bottom of the stairway to heaven was the source of the soaring dragon river. Legend had it that when the gods ascended to heaven, they shed tears because they couldn't bear to part with their loved ones. The stairway to heaven was covered with clouds. Legend had it that it led directly to the palace of the goddess. Because the Grand Canal started here, the Grand Canal's conferring ceremony would naturally be held here. Legend had it that the broken stairway to heaven was a goddess. Therefore, every time there was a ceremony, a woman had to preside over it. Gong Yimo was wearing a complicated palace dress. As she ascended the mountain, she lifted the curtain and looked at the sky. It was already afternoon, but visibility wasn't high. Many people were already waiting at the altar of heaven. They folded paper lotuses and threw them down the cliff to pray for their blessings before the conferring ceremony. Soon, it was the new year. Everyone had good wishes and hoped to take advantage of this auspicious day to gain some blessings. Countless officials and nobles had arrived. However, on this day, everything was simple. They all stood beside the altar of heaven and looked at the wooden altar that had been built for almost 400 years. Their expressions were solemn. Speaking of which, this altar was even older than the history of Dai state. The reason why they looked solemn was because the founding empress of the Dau Empire, a respectable woman, jumped down from this place. For the next 50 years, the founding emperor did not allow anyone to come here. After he died, this place was reopened. When the emperor arrived with his concubines, everyone knelt down to welcome them. They were all wearing dark clothes and walked towards the altar of heaven with solemn expressions. The emperor was the first to ascend the altar and announced the start of the ceremony. Everyone present bowed their heads and kowtowed. Beside the altar were the officials, followed by the imperial guards, and the outermost circle were the commoners. Today is an auspicious day. Dai state's canals have been completed by offering sacrifices to the heavens here. From now on, the heavens will bless the people, and the weather will be favorable. The officials shouted, and each of them took out a pearl that they had prepared beforehand. They held it up and faced the direction of the emperor. After the emperor, it was the crown prince's turn. The crown prince had contributed greatly to the construction of the canal, so he would be the one to read today's prayer. After he finished reading, it was Gong Yimo's turn. Under Gong Che's arrangement, today's activities were kept simple. Gong Yimo only needed to hold the pearls in her hands, kowtow every 3 steps, and finally climb to the edge of the cliff and throw the pearls in her hands down. Gong Yimo breathed a sigh of relief as this matter was relatively simple. She was surrounded by people. Although the ceremony was simple, it was also solemn. Everyone looked at her seriously because in their hearts, this stairway was like the place closest to the gods. No filth was allowed. Before coming here, not only did she have to bathe and change her clothes, but she also had to abstain from food for 3 days in advance. She couldn't be careless at all. Gong Yimo knelt down. There were people on both sides of the wooden sacrificial altar, including Kim Yoon and Long Cheng Ting Shui. In the middle, there was a road paved with white brocade. From afar, it looked like it could really reach the heavens. She bowed, then took 3 steps forward and knelt down again. From the moment she got off the carriage, her feet couldn't be stained by the slightest bit of dust. Before coming here, she soaked in water the whole morning, burned incense, and bathed. She bowed again. At this time, Long Cheng Ting Shui's eyes became very resentful. Even though Gong Yimo didn't look directly, she could feel it. Although she had to bow every 3 steps, it was also an honor. Being able to climb the stairway to heaven was an honor above all belief. The stairway to heaven's altar was equivalent to Lu Yi's sacred lake. How could she not be jealous? Gong Yimo smiled and bowed again. At this moment, her heart became especially calm. During this period of time, she really didn't like the way she was stuck in the mud. The biting cold wind on the broken stairway to heaven made people sober up. Her eyes and ears were clear, and she could see her appearance clearly again. She shouldn't be a person who was deeply in love. The crown on her head lightly touched the white brocade on the ground. The smooth and cold feeling made people feel refreshed. At this time, the people on the altar had already left and replaced it with a new brocade. It was snow-white and covered all the wooden boards below. It felt like there was nothing there originally. She smiled faintly, and finally, she stepped on it. The altar had been built for a long time, so when she stepped on it, there was still a creaking sound. Therefore, she couldn't help but lighten her strength and was about to step on it with her other foot. At this moment, there was a sudden sneer from the crowd. Ridiculous, the stairway to heaven's altar is such a sacred place. You actually let an extremely filthy woman climb up? Gong Yimo's line of sight passed through the crowd and accurately landed on that person. With this look, there was a sense of familiarity. Gong Dai's eyes turned cold. In the next moment, he was ready to let the Imperial Guards kill that person. At this time, Gong Cheng hurriedly said, "You can't kill people on the altar." This was an iron law. It was an iron law that the founding emperor left behind. It must be obeyed. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and stared at that person in green. He said in a deep voice, "Drag him away." But that person in green smiled and actually pulled out a sword. The surrounding people were so frightened that they moved aside and made a path for him. "I will leave after I finish what I want to say. Don't force me to kill." Gong Cheng's face was as heavy as water. He was wondering if he should break the law. But he glanced at Gong Yimo. His daughter shouldn't have any weakness that could be used against her. In this moment of hesitation, the person in green revealed a victorious smile and walked step by step in front of the people. "I say, she, the princess of Daiyu State, looks noble and pure, but is dirty on the inside. You're courting death." Gong Che suddenly said, "Imperial Father, are you going to let this person spread lies to mislead the people?" "I'm courting death." The person in green looked at the surrounding people who were curious about his shocking news. There were many people who wanted to see Gong Yimo's miserable state. As long as he added fuel to the fire, there was no need to worry that it wouldn't burn out. What I'm about to say is true. If there are any lies, may the heavens and earth destroy me. When he said this, the people couldn't help but believe him. This was originally an era of faith. Moreover, they were at a sacred place like the altar. How could he dare to lie? Gong Cheng was still hesitating. At this time, that person had already pointed at Gong Yimo and coldly spoke. His voice was very loud and everyone could hear it clearly. This person, this seemingly dignified woman, is actually having an affair with her own brother behind her back. Tell me, such a woman, is she qualified to enter the heaven-seeking platform? His words caused an uproar. Chapter 302. Gong Yimo's face paled. This day had finally come. She knew very well that if she didn't want people to know, she shouldn't have done it in the first place. Her affair with Gong Dai would be exposed one day, but she didn't expect it to be now. And Gong Dai was already prepared to kill him even if he had to disobey the emperor's order. But he clenched his fists tightly. Not now. Unless he killed everyone here, he had to resolve this matter in front of them. Otherwise, how would Royal Sister deal with herself in the future? He had to think of a foolproof plan. Palace Master Gong laughed loudly, then his face suddenly darkened. "Ridiculous. My daughter and my son. Don't think that I don't dare to kill you and punish you for your crime of misleading the public." The man in green was awe-inspiring and fearless. "Since I'm already standing here today, I'm not prepared to live anymore. I just can't bear to see this woman accept the praise of the world on one hand, while doing such a shady business on the other. Even if I die, I will expose her true colors. Where's the evidence?" Gong Yimo suddenly raised her eyebrows. At this moment, she retracted her foot from the wooden altar and looked at him coldly as she asked, "Evidence?" That person's eyes flashed. Seeing that the people were listening quietly, his lips curled into a smile. "When you were in the cold palace, you and Prince Chi often slept together. Boys and girls don't eat at the same table when they are 7 years old, and you still say that you didn't do it." Gong Yimo frowned deeply. Without waiting for Gong Yimo to speak, that person continued, "After leaving the cold palace, your biological brother often came in and out of your bedroom. He stayed for half a day, and every time, he would dismiss the palace servants. Isn't that shady business in the harem?" Every time he said something, the faces of the officials turned uglier. Because what he said was the truth. They didn't think so before, but now that he said it, it really made them suspicious. Later, in order to save your lover, you didn't hesitate to fake your death in the West Continent to save him. In the end, you were seriously injured. Who didn't know that it was your biological brother, Qi Wangyi, who took care of you wholeheartedly and even cut his own flesh to save you? Is this kinship? Later on, when King Qi returned to the capital, he locked you up in his estate. There was no ambiguity at all. Who knew what you were doing in your estate every day? Because of you, King Qi has remained unmarried for his entire life. Shut up. Gong Yimo did not expect him to be so disgusting, twisting everything to such an extent. What he said was the truth, and everyone present could not help but overthink. Even the emperor was speechless. Back then, Gong Yimo was so anxious to save Gong Dai. Could it be that she had a private relationship with Gong Dai? Why can't you tell me? The blue-clothed man sneered. Only you are allowed to do these dirty things, but no one is allowed to talk about it. Is such a filthy person worthy of ascending the altar? Seeing Gong Yimo's gloomy expression, Gong Dai only wanted to chop this person into pieces. He couldn't take it anymore. He shot a look at the imperial guards below, telling them to surround him and kill him directly. That was the best way. Nonsense. At this moment, Kim Yoon suddenly stood up. He looked at the crowd below and sneered, I am the second prince of Yuheng. Back then, when Moa left the country for 3 years, she was with me. I know best what kind of person she is. She is definitely not the kind of person you are describing. The blue-clothed man snorted. So, she even went to your bed. Are you telling me that for 3 years, a man and a woman together, nothing happened between the two of you? His words made everyone speechless. Their suspicious gazes once again fell on Gong Yimo. Imperial father. Gong Dai's eyes were filled with cold murderous intent. Are you going to let this person slander royal sister? At this moment, he did not want to tolerate it anymore. He wanted to kill this person. But at this moment, Gong Che pulled him back. At this moment, Gong Dai and Gong Yimo were pushed to the teeth of the storm. If Gong Dai did something, then Mo would really be unable to clean up the mess. At this moment, Emperor Gong glanced at him, then at Kim Yoon. He suddenly had a feeling that if he betrothed Mo to Kim Yoon, the rumors would be dispelled. But was all of this really a rumor? Thinking of the words he had heard all these years, his gaze towards Gong Dai became suspicious. As the saying goes, there is no smoke without fire. Seeing that the emperor did not speak, the officials and the commoners all looked pensive. Gong Che also could not sit still. He also pleaded, Imperial father, please investigate clearly. Imperial sister is definitely not that kind of person. The blue-clothed man pointed at Gong Che and said, I almost forgot, there is still the crown prince. He laughed and randomly bit people like a mad dog. Gong Yimo and the crown prince built the canal for a year and a half. I heard that they ate and lived in the same courtyard. I'm afraid that the crown prince also slept in his own sister's bed. Ridiculous. At this time, Emperor Gong suddenly became angry. The crown prince was the foundation of the country. How could he allow him to slander him? It seemed that today, he really had to break the precept. If he killed this person, Moa's reputation would also be ruined, but he had to kill him. Guards, take this person down. But what surprised people was that this person's martial arts was actually very high. When he pulled out his sword, he took advantage of the panic of the crowd and flew over to seize imperial concubine Long. Emperor Gong could not help but stop and shouted loudly, Stop! Me, stop! The blue-clothed man smiled evilly and looked at Gong Yimo with a pair of gloomy eyes. If you can push that shameless woman down the stairs, I will let this woman go. The blade of the sword left a mark on Long Xiangxiang's neck. She was so scared that her face turned pale. She hurriedly shouted, Your Majesty, save me. At this time, everyone became restless. Many of the people outside saw that the situation was not right and slipped away. But the officials could not leave. They looked at Gong Yimo thoughtfully. Feeling the suspicious and disdainful gazes from all directions, Gong Yimo felt as if she had returned to her previous life where she was besieged on all sides. At that time, she did nothing, but after her secret was exposed, she became a sinner. Everyone blamed her, suspected her, and stood on the opposite side of her. She felt a dull pain in her heart. She raised her head and looked at the emperor, her voice trembling slightly. Imperial father, you don't believe me? This time, she also did nothing. Why was she still the one being despised? Emperor Gong opened his mouth but could not speak. This daughter was not his biological daughter after all. If she really knew something, it was not impossible for her to have feelings for Gong Dai. After all, she had always protected Gong Dai. If they really had an affair, this was simply a disgrace to the imperial family. Gong Dai could not help but step forward. With a wave of his hand, all the imperial guards raised their swords. The surrounding officials were so scared that their faces turned pale. Gong Dai, what are you doing? Are you rebelling? Someone shouted. Even Emperor Gong's face sank. Looking at Gong Dai step by step to Gong Yimo's side, he actually felt that what that person said was the truth. After all, they were so inseparable. I am only purging the traitor. This person keeps on slandering others. He is clearly a spy from the enemy country. Chapter 303. The man in blue retreats with Long Xiangxiang. Me? Spy? Prince Qi really knows how to put a hat on people. Then tell me, for whom did you not marry for so many years? At this time, Long Cheng-Ting Shui suddenly stands up. Her face is red, her eyes are firm, as if she has made a great decision. Don't wrongly accuse Prince Qi. Who said Prince Qi has never married? I. Princess Lu Yi. I want to marry him. Her words make everyone present stunned, but she shyly walks to Gong Dai's side, as if the two of them have privately promised to be together forever. She originally thought that her appearance at this time will win Gong Dai's favor. Perhaps in order to save Gong Yimo's face, he will directly promise to marry her. In this way, even if Gong Yimo escapes the calamity, her reputation will be tarnished, and she will finally get what she wants. But for this matter, she will lose her valiant subordinate. It is a pity, but fortunately, everything is worth it. Kim Yoon looks at her, as if suddenly awakened, and says, Moa is pure, I believe in her. I am willing to marry her. Ridiculous, she is pure, it is really the biggest joke in the world. The man in blue's eyes flash with bone-deep hatred. If she is pure, how can senior brother be beheaded by her sword? Poor him, he just arrived at the little princess's side and heard the news of senior brother's tragic death. This enmity, he must take revenge. The little princess said that she will lose her reputation, but he only wants her dead. If you're really innocent, then explain yourself. Explain why Prince Qi does not marry. Explain why the prince of the neighboring country wants to marry you. Explain why you live in the same courtyard as the crown prince. If you can't prove your innocence, then jump down from the broken stairway. If you die, you will be innocent. The man in blue's reaction is not only out of the little princess's expectation, but also out of everyone's expectations. Gong Dai's eyes flash with anger, coldly says, kill him. He can no longer endure. Even if he angers the emperor, so what? Even if this matter is confirmed, so what? At most, he will rebel. At most, he will admit it. But now, he only wants to kill this man, so his mouth shut. No. Gong Cheng hurriedly stopped him. Long Xiangxiang was still in his hands, how could he act rashly? But to his surprise, the imperial army refused to listen to him. He actually attacked the green-clothed man. Long Cheng-Ting Shui was scared out of her wits. She wanted to completely destroy Gong Yimo, but she didn't want to destroy Gong Dai. The imperial guard was fast, but Gong Yimo was faster. She attacked the man in green, but the man in green quickly retreated with Long Xiangxiang. Not only did they avoid the imperial guard, but they also avoided Gong Yimo. At this moment, the green-robed man waved his hand and Long Xiangxiang screamed. Her shoulder was cut open by his sword. Gong Cheng was anxious. Moa, stop. His words made Gong Yimo stop in her tracks. Once again, she landed on the side of the altar. She turned around and glared coldly at Gong Cheng. That gaze could be said to be the first time since the beginning of time. That boundless coldness and deterrence actually forced him, the emperor, to take 3 steps back. At this moment, he forgot about his anger at the imperial army for not listening to him, and also forgot about his suspicion of Gong Yimo. At this moment, there was only fear in his mind. Then, her gaze swept across the crowd and finally landed coldly on Long Chengting Shui. Long Chengting Shui was frightened by Gong Yimou's gaze and quickly hid behind Gong Dai. At this moment, she wanted to grab Gong Dai's hand, but Gong Dai ruthlessly flung her hand away. Gong Yimou's gaze landed on the two of them with a chill. At this moment, everyone stopped. The Imperial Army didn't know whether to continue or not, and the officials and commoners didn't dare to speak because that murderous aura was so real. Was Gong Yimou really that kind of person? She seemed to be involved with all these men. A fly wouldn't bite a seamless egg. Even if she was clean, how clean could she be? In addition to the past rumors and slanders, people had even more reason to suspect that she had done something dirty. Some people with more imagination were already imagining Gong Yimou's appearance in bed. Such a person really didn't deserve to be a saintess and go to the altar. Jump down. As long as you jump down, I'll immediately release this woman and cut my own throat here. Seeing that this person was so determined to die, the people's hearts were almost one-sided. Gong Cheng had a headache, but it was impossible for Gong Yimou to jump down. However, no matter how today's matter was resolved, Moa's reputation would be ruined. Gong Yimou suddenly laughed. You're saying that I have an affair with Kim Yoon, Gong Che, and Gong Dai? The green-clothed man snorted, shameless. Ever since Gong Yimou killed Kang Xiu, he couldn't wait for her to die. In addition, the little princess often instilled in him some shameless words about Gong Yimou. After a long time, he believed it without a doubt. At this moment, he felt that talking to her was like dirtying himself. Gong Yimou smiled and raised her hand. Her sleeve slipped down, revealing her spotlessly white arm. In this gloomy weather, it was dazzling white. And on that dazzling white arm, there was a vermilion dot of chastity sand, which stung everyone's eyes. Some people with bad intentions were even more suspicious. Was that chastity sand real? Those suspicious gazes made Gong Yimou very uncomfortable, but she didn't seem to feel it at all. She smiled and said to the green-clothed man, "Do you want to know if this is real? Come and see for yourself." The green-clothed man seemed to be possessed. How could Gong Yimou have that chastity sand? It must be fake. It must be. He dragged the half-dead Long Xiangxiang forward. His eyes stared intently at that smear of red. After a while, he actually wanted to reach out and touch it to determine if it was real or fake. He moved closer to Gong Yimou because Gong Yimou didn't have anything in her hands. He was also confident in his martial arts, so he wasn't afraid of her. That chastity sand. It looked real. Just as he frowned and wanted to take a closer look, Gong Yimou curved her lips into a smile. "How is Kang Xiu related to you?" The green-clothed man heard this and raised his head. At this moment, a cloud of white powder suddenly flew towards him. He couldn't dodge in time and that powder viciously pierced into his eyes, causing him to subconsciously close his eyes. He had never expected that Gong Yimou would actually crush the pearl in her hand and use it to plot against him. She took this opportunity to grab his sword and pulled Long Xiangxiang out and threw her to one side. The green-clothed man subconsciously retreated. At the moment when he couldn't see anything, Gong Yimou had already rushed forward and tightly grasped his hand. "Isn't it fun? You've been playing for so long, it's my turn to play." Her words seemed to have been whispered into his ear, but it caused a chill to run down his spine. Under this provocation, the green-clothed man endured the pain and opened his eyes. Gong Yimou's hand had already fiercely slapped his face. Slap. This slap carried with it a vicious aura, causing half of his face to swell up. It was extremely frightening. "This is the first slap. It's your fault for speaking rudely and making me sick." Chapter 304. The man in green was stunned by her slap. He was still retreating and the people behind him hurriedly retreated, revealing the cliff behind them. Slap. Gong Yimou blocked his random attack and slapped his face again. "This slap is for your despicable actions. You're not a man." That slap sound made everyone's heart tremble. Their faces also seemed to be in pain. Gong Yimou was angry and the murderous aura around her made many people fearful. It was as if she was killing a chicken to warn the monkeys, making them afraid as well. This time, the azure-clothed man regained his senses. His eyes were wide open. His eyes were red and filled with veins. "I'll kill you." He swung his sword at Gong Yimo. As a warrior, he was slapped by a slut in front of everyone. This was an unprecedented humiliation, but even his senior brother was not Gong Yimo's match. How could he be her match? And the angrier he was, the better. Gong Yimo sneered and dodged. In the end, she actually grabbed his sword with her bare hands and slapped him again. Slap. This slap could be said to have completely destroyed the man in green's male self-esteem. The sword in his hand was tightly grasped by Gong Yimo. She directly snatched it away, as if she was not afraid of pain. The blade of the sword was dripping with blood. The man in green was slapped to the ground by Gong Yimo. Injured and humiliated, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Looking at Gong Yimo's eyes, it was as if he could not wait to eat her flesh and drink her blood. "Who are you to Zongrui?" Gong Yimo asked loftily. The man in green almost blurted out, but he thought of something. He covered his face and laughed sinisterly. "What Zongrui? I don't know him at all." He had to endure. He would not expose that he was Lu Yi's man. Gong Yimo laughed. It seemed that the stimulation was not enough. She threw his sword on the ground. At this moment, her hand was trembling and her palm was a bloody mess. But it didn't matter. She used her trembling hand to pull something off her neck and waved it in front of him. The blood-stained iron chain swayed in front of the green-clothed man. The words hidden rust on it stung the green-clothed man deeply. "These are my spoils of war." Gong Yimo's voice was faint, like a ghost, and it accurately reached his ears. "At that time, I slashed his body more than a dozen times, humiliating and torturing him. In the end, I cut off his head with my sword." The green-clothed man raised his head abruptly. At this moment, he had forgotten the pain on his face. His face was tense as he stared at Gong Yimo with trembling skin and flesh. He gritted his blood-stained teeth and finally tore open his collar. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not Lu Yi's man." He didn't have a name tag around his neck. To be able to remove the nameplate that was more important than life, it seemed like he was really determined to die. Gong Yimo smiled and the silver necklace in her hand fell to the ground. The green-clothed man's gaze followed, and in that moment, his eyes flashed with hatred. As a martial artist, their honor could be reflected on their nameplates. And his senior brother, Lu Yi's most powerful martial artist, had a total of 8 engravings on his nameplate. Each engraving represented his honor, but at this moment, it had fallen into the dust and was stained with dust. It didn't have the slightest bit of its former glory. Thinking of this, he couldn't bear to look at it any longer. He stared hatefully at Gong Yimo and a dagger suddenly appeared in his hand. He wanted to commit suicide. He wanted to use his death to forcefully throw the crime of having an affair onto her. She would never be able to wash it away in this lifetime. "Gong Yimo, do you think that by framing me and killing me, you can clear your name? You're a slut. I'm willing to die to prove that I'm not lying." He raised the dagger high and was about to stab himself in the abdomen. But after raising it for a while, it didn't fall. It wasn't Gong Yimo who stopped him. Instead, it was Gong Yimo who calmly raised her foot and fiercely stomped on the nameplate on the ground. The green-clothed man's eyes immediately turned red. Seeing that things were about to go south, Long Cheng's Ting Shui suddenly cried and said to the emperor, "Your Majesty of Dai Yu State, the nameplate represents the honor of our Lu Yi people. Our two countries may have had a misunderstanding in the past, but Jiyu country's princess trampling on the nameplate is equivalent to trampling on our Lu Yi country's prestige. Although I, Long Cheng's Ting Shui, am a woman, I can't tolerate this. Your Majesty, please uphold justice for Ting Shui." She knelt down with a plop, but her heart was nervous. She knew Kang Xiu's position in Kang Jian's heart. Otherwise, she wouldn't have incited a warrior to do such a shady business of slandering others. But if Kang Jian couldn't take the humiliation and exposed his identity, then Gong Yimo could easily clear her name by accusing him of being a spy. She absolutely wouldn't allow it. Emperor Cheng looked at Gong Yimo with some difficulty. At this moment, Mo was insulted, so how could she be willing to let it go? His silence made Long Cheng's Ting Shui anxious. "Your Majesty, are you trying to cause a conflict between Lu Yi and Dai Yu State?" Emperor Cheng's expression became serious. He opened his mouth to stop Gong Yimo, but at this time, Gong Dai stepped forward and said coldly, "Imperial Father, if we allow an unknown person to bully Dai Yu State's princess, that would be the biggest joke in the world. You." Long Cheng's Ting Shui didn't expect that Gong Dai would side with Gong Yimo at this time. He had already committed a serious crime by acting without permission. Wasn't he worried about her at all? When Emperor Cheng saw Gong Dai, he also remembered that the imperial guards didn't listen to him and listened to Gong Dai instead. This matter could be big or small, but now wasn't the time to be calculative. Gong Yimo knew that Gong Dai could help her deal with that side, so she didn't care at all. As if she didn't hear Long Cheng's Ting Shui, she exerted force on her feet. The embroidered shoe with a large peony embroidered with gold and silver thread ruthlessly stomped on the nameplate, carrying a sense of humiliation. The nameplate that represented status and glory was trampled under the foot of a woman who was his enemy. This scene made Tsangjian's eyes bulge and almost bleed. But he still endured. He couldn't expose himself and let others know that he was Lu Yi's man. He couldn't ruin the little princess's plans. So his hand that was holding the dagger trembled, and he wanted to stab it down. "Do you know? The person under my foot is the #1 expert in Lu Yi. He's arrogant and conceited, but he listens to a woman's orders and participates in those women's private affairs. His actions are not open and above board at all, not like a man at all." Gong Yimo's mocking voice was like a magic spell that tickled people's nerves, making Tsangjian endure again and again. Not only is he conceited, but he also has evil intentions. Who knows what he's thinking when he's determined to protect a woman? It's really disgusting. "You're not allowed to insult him." Tsangjian finally couldn't endure it anymore. "You bitch. I'm going to kill you." He turned the dagger that was about to stab himself towards Gong Yimo. However, Gong Yimo grabbed his hand, leaned close to him, and sneered. "You're allowed to slander me, but I'm not allowed to give you a taste of your own medicine." "Ha! I'm not only going to say it, I'm going to say it loudly, Tsangjian, he's a coward." Chapter 305. RRR. At that moment, Hidden Sword's body exploded with a shocking murderous aura. He suddenly pounced towards Gong Yimo. He wished that he could perish together with her. Gong Yimo was forced back a few steps by his momentum. Once she got used to it, she quickly counterattacked. Everyone present retreated far away, afraid that they would be implicated. But that green-robed man had such a huge reaction towards Lu Yi's death. This point was enough to make people ponder. Could it be that he was really a spy sent by the neighboring country to slander the princess? This matter was caused by Gong Yimo and could only be resolved by her. At this moment, no one could interfere. Probably only Long Cheng's Ting Shui was anxious. She wished that Hidden Sword could die quickly. In this situation, if he was caught, then he would not be able to clear his name. "Did Long Cheng's Ting Shui ask you to do this?" Gong Yimo lowered her voice and asked. The cold wind blew on her face, giving people a ruthless and fierce feeling. She was obviously kind, but now, it was as if she had revealed another side, which only represented evil. Hidden Sword panicked and almost lost his grip on the dagger in his hand. "After slandering me, you still want to slander the pure and innocent princess? You bitch, you're really disgusting. Pure and innocent." Gong Yimo seemed to have heard the funniest joke. Lu Yi people don't care about chastity. Do you dare to say that you haven't slept in your little princess's bed? Her words deeply provoked Kang Rui. Also, if Long Cheng's Ting Shui, who had an affair with her subordinates, was as pure as ice and as pure as jade, then Gong Yimo, who still had her chastity mark, was really as disgusting as Long Cheng's Ting Shui said? At that moment, Hidden Sword had a second of doubt. But Gong Yimo did not give him the chance and took the opportunity to kick him away. The moment he reacted, his hands were firmly holding onto the edge of the cliff. His whole body was suspended in the air. At that moment, his face was filled with horror. Without waiting for him to climb up, Gong Yimo was already standing at the edge of the cliff, blocking all his escape route. Suicide was one thing, but being forced into a dead end was another. At this moment, he no longer had the momentum he had when he wanted to commit suicide. The wind that blew up from the bottom of the cliff was bone-chilling, making him feel cold all over. His heart felt weak, and the hand that was holding the rock was sweating. If you don't want to die, why don't you jump down? Gong Yimo was standing at the edge of the cliff. Her toes were even sticking out of the cliff. Hidden Sword felt as if a mountain was pressing down on him. He clenched his teeth. His heart was in turmoil, but he couldn't make up his mind. Gong Yimo lightly stepped on the back of his hand that was clinging to the edge of the cliff. Even though she didn't use much strength, the hidden threat of oppression wasn't any worse than her crushing him. You must be Zhong Rui's junior brother. Gong Yimo's earth-shattering words made Hidden Sword unable to hold back his shock and raise his head. Gong Yimo frowned and continued, your moves are very similar to his, because he personally taught you. But when he taught you, he definitely didn't teach you what it means to be willing to lose a bet and what it means to be a gentleman. He took advantage of my inconvenience to make a move on me and humiliated me. Then he was killed by me. It's his skill that was inferior. Why do you hate me? Why are you slandering me? Why? As she spoke, she exerted more strength on her foot. Even Long Cheng Ting Shui couldn't stand it anymore. Princess, how can you humiliate a person like this? Since he wanted to die, why do you still want to humiliate him? When she said this, her eyes were red, making Gong Yimo seem very cruel. Gong Yimo dug her ears. Gong Dai, this woman is so annoying. This man is Lu Yi's man, she is also Lu Yi's man. Maybe they are jackals of the same tribe. Help me shut her up first, then I'll deal with her later. When Gong Dai heard this, he smiled and said, yes, royal sister. As he spoke, he glanced around. Immediately, imperial guards came forward and prepared to tie up Long Cheng Ting Shui. Because it was Dai Yu State's big day, Lu Yi's envoys didn't follow. Therefore, Long Cheng Ting Shui was alone and helpless. The maidservants didn't dare to come forward. Only she panicked and asked the emperor for help. Your Majesty of Dai Yu State, what do you mean by this? Ting Shui only sympathized for a moment and didn't mean anything else. But Princess Jiyu Guo slandered me like this and wanted to arrest me. Does Dai Yu State want to start a war with Lu Yi? Gong Cheng was also taken aback. Gongju, what are you doing? Let go of her. However, Gong Dai was indifferent. He looked coldly at Long Cheng Ting Shui being tied up and gagged. He looked in Gong Yimo's direction and smiled. Father, you are confused. I am only arresting the spy's accomplice for the safety of Dai Yu State. Are you rebelling? Emperor Gong was really angry. Subconsciously, he wanted Chang Shi to arrest Gong Dai. At this time, Gong Yimo said faintly, Father, they said that I had an affair with my brother, so you are suspicious. But I said that this woman is a spy, so I am rebelling? Ha ha ha. Gong Yimo sneered, then her smile suddenly disappeared. Gong Dai was only following my orders. I will take responsibility for this matter. Father, please don't interfere. It was obviously the same rebellious words, but Gong Yimo said it in such a sad tone. For no reason, Emperor Gong's anger was suddenly extinguished. He looked at Gong Yimo, then looked at Long Cheng Ting Shui who was struggling desperately. Finally, he looked at Gong Dai and said nothing. Gong Dai smiled. Anyway, things had already reached this point. From the moment he attacked the imperial army, he didn't care about anything else. What rebellion was there to be afraid of? But seeing Long Cheng Ting Shui tied up, she was scared out of her wits. Her mouth was also gagged, so she could only make muffled sounds. She was a princess of a country. Could it be that the emperor wanted to silence her by killing her? Hidden Sword was angry. What did they want to do to the little princess? Gong Yimo bent down and looked at Hidden Sword who was struggling to hang on the edge of the cliff. She revealed an evil smile. Her smile revealed her white teeth, which made people feel a chill down their spine. Were you sent by her? Pei, you're slandering me. Gong Yimo smiled again. That smile was as scary as it could be. Once she had evil thoughts, her whole person was like an evil demon. Her eyes were full of hostility. Gong Dai, bring her here. Gong Dai heard this and personally dragged Long Cheng Ting Shui to the edge of the cliff. At this time, Hidden Sword's heart was like dead ashes. His hand slightly loosened, as if he wanted to fall, but his left hand was firmly stepped on by Gong Yimo. He couldn't succeed. He couldn't live, he couldn't die. It was almost like that. Seeing that no one helped her, Long Chengting Shui was so scared that she cried. She was dragged in front of Gong Yimo. At this time, she looked at Gong Yimo with eyes full of horror, as if she was a terrible monster. Gong Yimo reached out and patted her face. The wind blew her black and red robe. There was an indescribable evil charm. "Do you want to die?" she asked softly. Chapter 306. Long Chengting Shui felt that her hand was cold, and because of the cold, her palm was no longer bleeding. However, the cold and sticky blood was still smeared on her face, making her tremble all over. Let her go. Hidden Sword wanted to commit suicide, but at the same time, he looked at his little princess suffering. That feeling was really painful. But Gong Yimo would not be soft at this time. The more painful the enemy was, the more ruthless she would be. "Well, if you admit that you were sent by her, I will let her go, otherwise I will scratch her face. What do you think?" Gong Yimo slowly said. Her palm was suck. The dagger that fell on the ground was caught in her palm. Seeing this scene, Long Chengting Shui let out a cry. How dare she? She is Lu Yi's little princess. Her brother and parents love her so much. How dare they treat her like this? At this time, many ministers could not stand it anymore. Is this okay? They looked at their emperor. At this time, the emperor's expression was not good. Originally, it was a good ceremony, but unexpectedly, it turned into this. He was also angry in his heart, but now, he just endured it. Seeing that no one stopped him, Hidden Sword shouted in disbelief. "Are you all dead? She is Lu Yi's princess." In fact, when he said this, people with discerning eyes had already seen it, but they all looked at this scene coldly and did not intervene. At worst, they would kill all of Lu Yi's people here, who would know? Gong Yimo did not give up. She coldly looked at Hidden Sword's swollen face, struggling on the edge of the cliff, and smiled slightly. "Have you thought it over? If you don't admit it, then I will do it." With that, she put the dagger on Long Chengting Shui's face. The cold touch made Long Chengting Shui's body that was still struggling not dare to move. Face is the most important thing for a woman. She was really afraid that Gong Yimo would do it for real. Hidden Sword gritted his teeth. Now that the truth was right in front of him, why did she still want him to admit it? Was she trying to make him unable to meet Lu Yi even if he died? As he thought of this, grief welled up within him. He was prepared to break off his own arm and fall down. He didn't want to endure this humiliation. However, just as that thought flashed through his mind, a sharp pain came from the back of his hand that was being stepped on by Gong Yimo. He had no choice but to lean on the edge of the cliff with both hands as he glared fiercely at Gong Yimo. But at the same time, Gong Yimo turned the dagger in her hand and left a bloody mark on Long Chengting Shui's face. No. Long Chengting Shui's eyes widened as she struggled desperately. The pain on her face made her, who had never been hurt before, terrified. The blood dripped onto Gong Yimo's hand and dripped down, splashing onto the dust and staining the Hidden Sword's eyes. Gong Yimo. It was the first time that Hidden Sword had called her by her name. His voice was filled with disbelief and anger. How dare you? How dare you? He thought that Gong Yimo only said it to threaten him. She wouldn't dare to do anything to the little princess, unless she really wanted to start a war. However, Gong Yimo's actions directly destroyed his last hope. It made him deeply understand that an enraged Gong Yimo would dare to do anything. Threaten. He was underestimating her too much. A bloodthirsty light flashed in her eyes as she smiled gently. If you commit suicide, I'll push her down. If you don't admit it, I'll cut her face piece by piece. Anyway, you weren't sent by her and you're not Lu Yi's people. You shouldn't feel bad, right? Her voice was calm and even her tone didn't fluctuate. However, each and every word made Long Chengting Shui's body stiffen. She didn't even dare to show her resentment. Were the people of Dai Yu State crazy? It was fine that Gong Dai allowed her to fool around, but why didn't anyone else help her? What she didn't know was that at the coronation ceremony last time, those who dared to go against Gong Yimo were ruthlessly dealt with by Gong Dai. How could they dare to say anything? Moreover, in his heart, Gong Yimo had a firearm in her hands. If this matter was really Lu Yi's conspiracy, he naturally wouldn't be afraid because it was reasonable. However, even if Gong Yimo wronged Long Chengting Shui and the two countries really went to war, he wasn't afraid. This was the reason why no one stopped her when she did such an outrageous thing. Hidden Sword's heart turned cold. What should he do so that the little princess wouldn't be hurt? As long as you admit it, I won't kill her and send her back to the palace in one piece. However, if you don't admit it. Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes and stared at Long Chengting Shui's pale face. Her tone became softer. If you don't admit it, then there's no other way. I'm sure it's her. If you don't admit it, then I'll throw her down to vent the hatred in my heart. Is there no law in Daiyu State? The servant girl who came with Long Chengting Shui, who was tied up, shouted loudly. She was very scared, but she couldn't back down at this time. Otherwise, if the little princess died, how could they live? You keep saying that it's the princess who did it. Where's the evidence? Gong Yimo's line of sight finally shifted from Ting Shui to the maidservant. With one glance, the maidservant trembled. Evidence? Gong Yimo smiled. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and said faintly, I don't want evidence. I just think it's her. I want to kill her. I want her dead. Her words were simply unreasonable. However, the coldness and murderous intent in her words made many people's faces turn pale. They didn't dare to look at her. After saying that, she was a little impatient. She frowned slightly and said coldly to Hidden Sword, who was sweating profusely and looking extremely embarrassed. Have you thought it through? Do you admit it or not? If you don't admit it, then I'll throw her down with you. She really dared to do that. This knowledge made Long Chengting Shui's heart tremble. At this time, she no longer cared about her image and whimpered at Hidden Sword. However, when she looked at Hidden Sword, her eyes were full of fear and resentment. If he didn't commit suicide, if he wasn't provoked by Gong Yimo, how could so many things have happened? However, now, she couldn't care so much. Maybe if she died, it would bring trouble to Gong Yimo, but she didn't want to die. Gong Yimo smiled and pulled out the cloth from her mouth. Are you going to admit it? Long Chengting Shui looked at her in panic. At this time, she was extremely scared, but she still wanted to play tricks. She cried a pear blossom in the rain. It's me, it's all my fault. Please don't kill me. Gong Yimo, you're confessing under torture. Hidden Sword felt sorry for the little princess and shouted angrily. You mean I wronged her? Her face showed a touch of ridicule. She reached out and grabbed Long Chengting Shui's body and pushed her towards the cliff without hesitation. If that's the case, then just kill her and directly frame her. I'm too lazy to play anymore. Chapter 307. Her action scared Long Chengting Shui to death. She felt her body falling down the cliff uncontrollably. This scene fell into Hidden Sword's eyes. He could no longer control himself and shouted, I'll talk. I'll talk. Long Chengting Shui's arm was pulled by Gong Yimo. Her entire body fell towards the cliff. At that moment, the cold wind blew against her face, blowing her long hair back. Her face instantly turned pale. She could see the giant steps under the cliff and the surging Long Teng River. This sudden drop and impact made her brain suddenly dizzy. Fortunately, Gong Yimo was holding on to her tightly. Otherwise, she would have fallen down by now. Gong Yimo glanced at him. Speak. Hidden Sword closed his eyes deeply. I was sent by Lu Yi. And? Gong Yimo slightly frowned and said impatiently, Are you her man? Hidden Sword glanced at the little princess and saw that she was scared silly at this time, unable to speak at all. His expression flashed a trace of unbearable. I am the little princess's man. My name is Hidden Sword. I'm the junior brother of the person you killed, Kang Xiu. He knew that Gong Yimo wanted to force him to admit that he was the little princess's man, so he admitted it, hoping that Gong Yimo would let the little princess go. He also wanted to say that he came to harm Gong Yimo not because of the little princess, but because he resented Gong Yimo for killing his senior brother, so he did it. But after Gong Yimo got his answer, she suddenly smiled. She loosened her foot and Hidden Sword was caught off guard and fell back. Then in the moment he did not react, Gong Yimo kicked away his other hand. His body was in the air and he suddenly opened his eyes wide. No. He only had time to let out a hurried cry and his whole body fell down the cliff. He probably died with his eyes wide open. Hidden Sword's death finally made Long Chengting Shui come back to her senses. At this time, she finally said to Gong Yimo with some anger, "Are you satisfied now?" Gong Yimo yawned. "I don't know what you mean. I didn't want him to die. He wanted to commit suicide. I'm just helping him." After saying that, he actually dragged her onto the altar. Gong Yimo's decisive kick just now made everyone's hair stand on end. Even if there was no more fighting, they still didn't dare to gather around. But Gong Yimo didn't care and directly said to Gong Cheng, "Imperial Father, I will personally send her back to her country and seek justice from King Lu Yi." Now that Gong Yimo no longer wanted to kill her, Long Chengting Shui finally regained some courage. Because of her extreme anger, a mocking expression appeared on her face. "Send me back to my country. Gong Yimo, you're making me confess under torture." The more she spoke, the angrier she got. "That person just now was indeed my subordinate, but he wasn't ordered by me. It's because you killed his senior brother that he became like this. Since you have such a high-sounding reason, why didn't you say it before?" Gong Yimo calmly asked. Long Chengting Shui's face turned red. She was still tied up at this time and her mind was in a mess. "Because I'm afraid you'll misunderstand that I sent him." Her words lacked confidence. Gong Yimo had countless reasons to refute her, but at this time, she was too lazy to argue with her. The corner of her mouth twitched as she said, "Okay, but if you say one more word, I'll give you another stab in the face." This sentence directly made Long Chengting Shui angry, but she trembled and didn't dare to speak again. Gong Cheng also felt that Gong Yimo's actions were a bit too much. After all, the two countries still wanted to cooperate. They were in the right, so they should stop. If they really made a big deal out of it, would they start a war over such a small matter? But Gong Yimo insisted. She even knelt down with a cold and solemn expression. "Imperial Father, this isn't the first time. They slandered me and humiliated me both times during the conferring ceremony and this time during the conferring ceremony. If I don't ask them clearly about this matter, they will think that my Daiyu state is afraid of them." Gong Cheng was a little angry, but it's not as serious as being sent back to the country. Is this breaking off relations? As soon as he finished speaking, a minister quickly echoed, "Yes, Princess, we know that you've been wronged, but the marriage between the two countries is a good thing. How can you destroy the contract between the two countries because of a moment of anger? Princess is a bit too selfish." They spoke one after another, as if they were all righteous and she was the one who was making trouble without reason. Gong Yimo looked at them coldly and suddenly stood up. At this time, her hair was loose and her clothes were a little messy, but no one thought that she was in a sorry state. Because she stood there, the suppressed anger made people shut up. "Speak, why don't you speak?" she asked with a calm face and a smile. "When she sent that person to humiliate me, why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you speak up for me?" The more she spoke, the colder she became. In the end, the anger was so strong that it was suffocating. "Not only did you not stand on my side, but you suspected me because of an outsider. Is it a good thing for Daiyu state if my reputation is ruined? Is this how you love your country?" No one dared to answer her. At this time, the people who advised her to consider the big picture all shrank back. They couldn't wait to disappear from Gong Yimo's sight. Moa. The emperor felt that her appearance was very scary. Her whole body was emitting a pressure that kept people away. But when she looked at him, he couldn't say a word. "When I was humiliated, as a citizen of Daiyu state, did you help me? Why do I have to endure when I'm wronged and disregard the big picture when I resist?" Gong Yimo's gaze swept across the crowd. Everyone avoided her gaze. Other than fear in their hearts, there was also a trace of guilt. They suddenly felt that their previous behavior seemed to be a little too much. "Now, it's fine if you don't seek justice for me. But when I seek justice for myself, you want to stop me. I really want to know, why?" Gong Yimo's eyes finally glared at Emperor Gong Cheng, forcing him to take a step back. "Imperial Father, I admit that I've done a lot for Daiyu state ever since I became sensible. I don't dare to say that it's all because of the good weather these past few years, But at least half of it, right? She looked at the officials again. And all of you, aren't you eating and wearing much better than before? Haven't your families become much wealthier because of the convenience of the water route? Is it because your lives are better, so you have the strength to find fault with me? She suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed, her expression full of ridicule. They say that you should never forget the person who dug the well when drinking water. Is this how you treat me? When I gave, I didn't refuse. When I was humiliated, I looked on coldly from the sidelines. You doubted me and wronged me. Now that the truth is out, because I'm a princess, you have to consider the big picture, and you want me to endure. Since that's the case, this princess, it's fine if I don't want to be. As she spoke, she suddenly reached out to take off the shaky crown on her head and fiercely smashed it on the ground. Chapter 308. This scene stunned everyone, including Gong Dai. Gong Dai's heart ached. He knew that the royal sister was using this method to divert their attention and make them forget about the affair between her and her younger brother. So she was making herself sad and forcing them to feel guilty. But every word she said was true. Why did the royal sister have to give so much? Wasn't it enough for them to enjoy themselves? Why did they have to make trouble for her? At this moment, he really wanted to take Gong Yimo away from this place and leave all these troubles behind. Or he could just rebel and suppress everyone who went against her, but he couldn't, because that wasn't the situation she wanted to see. If she wanted to rebel, she would have said so directly. She must have her reasons for making such a choice. So he endured it, but he would definitely make these people pay the price. Gong Yimo's hair fluttered. At this moment, there was no sadness in her expression, only self-mockery. But everyone could feel her sorrow. Yes, she had used this method to resolve this situation. Although she had resolved it, she had finally realized the gap between her and Gong Dai. Just now, Gong Dai had mobilized the Imperial Guards for her. The Imperial Guards had listened to him, but not the Emperor's orders. Just this alone was enough to make him guilty of rebellion. All his hard work over the years would be for naught, unless he really rebelled. And all of this was because of her. It was already so difficult for them to admit their feelings, so how could they talk about love? So she did this to make the Emperor feel guilty so that Gong Dai's actions would fade away. Secondly, she wanted to divert attention so that people would forget about the rumor of her having an affair with her younger brother. Thirdly, she wanted to leave, the sooner the better. Her sad expression made Gong Cheng's heart ache. She wasn't wrong. Because of her actions, not to mention other places in Dayu State, at least in the capital, the entire standard of living had been raised. But what were these people doing? When she was in trouble, not only did they look on coldly from the sidelines, some people even found fault with her time and time again. In comparison, they really had no conscience. As for the commoners who weren't scared away, they felt even more guilty after hearing her word. Gong Yimo was the person who had directly changed their lives. She was their benefactor. But for such a good person, when they heard others slandering her, they actually doubted her and thought in their hearts, so she's not perfect and has an ugly side. From the looks of it, these people were even uglier, not knowing how to repay kindness, echoing the opinions of others, and looking on coldly from the sidelines. From a certain point of view, this was even more hateful than the perpetrator. Gong Cheng was stunned by Gong Yimo's move and couldn't recover for a long time. At this moment, her skirt and hair fluttered in the wind. The crown that symbolized power and status was thrown to the ground by her, as if it were a pair of worn-out shoes. She was undoubtedly powerful, and the power that extended from her straight back could even pierce through the heavens and earth. But she was also weak. She would be hurt by the doubts of the world. She would throw her crown to the ground out of anger. She was really heartbroken. Her bloody right hand trembled slightly, hiding the turmoil in her heart. Thinking about how they had looked at such a woman with doubtful eyes and coldly watched such a woman being bullied, they were really unworthy of being men. Gong Che was the first to react. Although he really wished that Gong Yimo wasn't his sister, it wasn't in such a way. Seeing her sad was also very painful for him. Therefore, he stood up, picked up Gong Yimo's crown, and said, "Royal sister's character is clear, the sun and moon can bear witness to it. But you all slandered her for having an affair with this prince. Since that's the case, in order to not let Dai Yu State's reputation be tarnished, this prince will also not be the crown prince. His words shocked everyone. It was impossible for him to not be the crown prince. No one was more suitable than him. Gong Dai didn't say anything. He just stood beside Gong Yimo. No matter what royal sister wanted to do, he would support her unconditionally. This was something that both of them knew very well. Kim Yoon saw this scene and couldn't help but take a few steps back. Originally, when Long Chengting Shui came to find him and asked him to join forces with her to separate Gong Dai and Gong Yimo, he refused. But he still had a trace of ambition in his heart. What if Long Chengting Shui succeeded? Moa clearly saw that Gong Dai wasn't someone worth trusting. Then, wouldn't he have a chance? So, he didn't tell Gong Yimo about this matter. But he didn't expect Long Chengting Shui to be so bold and so vicious. And at such a time, such a thing had to happen. For him to even speak up for her was a reason to tarnish her reputation. Kim Yoon regretted it very much. If only he had told Moa earlier, she wouldn't have to suffer such a sudden blow. It was all his fault. Unfortunately, it was too late to regret. Seeing the crown prince say such words and Gong Dai standing beside Gong Yimo, everyone panicked. Their gazes couldn't help but fall on Long Chengting Shui's body with probing. It's just sending her back to her country. There will be a time when the two countries will cooperate again. But there is only one crown prince and such a good princess. More importantly, even if Gong Dai was suspected by the emperor because he exposed himself today, it doesn't mean that he will lose power because of this. If they don't do anything, in the future when Gong Dai solves his own problem and comes back to take revenge, they won't be able to resist. Seeing their gazes fall on her body, Long Chengting Shui, who originally thought that she was finally safe, suddenly opened her eyes wide. Are you really going to send me back to my country? But no one answered her. She shouted after the shock. No. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. If she were to go back like this, she would definitely become the laughingstock of the entire Lu Yi. The commoners didn't understand the twists and turns of the upper class. They just followed their hearts. Now that they felt guilty, they actually knelt down spontaneously. We are guilty. Please forgive us, princess. These voices that were full of guilt suddenly moved Gong Yimo. She raised her head and looked at them. When the commoners knelt down, the imperial guards also knelt down. Princess, please crown us again. We won't abandon Dai Yu State. They really felt that if Gong Yimo wasn't the princess, it would definitely be Dai Yu State's loss. So they shouted again, Princess, please crown us again. We won't abandon Dai Yu State. There was a trace of sadness in the deafening voices. They sincerely hoped that Gong Yimo could stay and be their princess again. When the officials saw this, some were forced by the situation, while some were willing to kneel down. Princess, please retract your order. We won't abandon Dai Yu State. Gong Yimo glanced at them. At this time, except for a few specific people, everyone was kneeling down. The entire altar was filled with their pleading voices. It was a world of difference from when they were suspicious of her and looked on coldly from the sidelines. She smiled coldly. Chapter 309. Long Chengting Shui was frightened. She looked around, but found that no one was looking at her. Are you crazy? I'm Lu Yi's most favored princess. Are you forcing me, Lu Yi, to go to war with Dai Yu State? But her voice didn't get any response. Everyone was devoutly worshipping the other woman. At this moment, her heart was like dead ashes. How could this be? She didn't expect Gong Yimo to be such a person who couldn't be provoked. But it's fine if she can't be provoked, but killing Hidden Sword wasn't enough. Why did she have to kill her? She didn't even think about it. If she was convicted of instigating the Hidden Sword sect, then she would be a princess who had an affair with many men. She even had an affair with her brother. Gong Yimo's reputation would be ruined. What was the difference between that and death? Emperor Gong felt quite uncomfortable. In his opinion, Gong Yimo had always been very strong. She seemed to be unbeatable, so he always felt that some blows were not worth mentioning to Moa. But now, he suddenly realized. No matter how strong she was still a little girl. She also had things that she couldn't accept. So being slandered and questioned was her reverse scale? Thinking of this, he whispered, "Moa, don't be angry, this matter." He glanced at Long Chengting Shui and made up his mind, since you want to send her back to her country, fine. But don't say things like not being a princess. Unexpectedly, Gong Yimo shook her head. Father, you don't understand. I'm tired of being a princess. She bluntly said such words, making Gong Cheng's face pale and speechless. Since I returned to my country, big and small matters have been constantly happening. I don't think I'm a person who takes the initiative to scheme against others or cause trouble. But this time, I really feel tired, just like this altar. She laughed mockingly. The altar that all of you regard as an honor is nothing more than a wooden plank in my eyes. However, so many people are forcing their fantasies onto me, thinking that I'm blocking their path. This is really boring. Seeing that she was about to turn around and leave, everyone present became anxious. Princess, please do not abandon Dai Yu State. Dai Yu State needs you, someone shouted. If there are any more rumors in the future, we will definitely distinguish between right and wrong. Princess, don't leave. Even Gong Cheng had never dealt with such a thing. Moa, what do I have to do to make you stay? Gong Cheng sighed, you're sad, but don't tell me you don't even want Imperial Father anymore. His words made Gong Yimo's departing figure pause, but she never looked back. Seeing that there was hope, Gong Cheng hurriedly said, Moa, I've wronged you all these years. Tell me, I'll agree to anything you want. Gong Yimo fell silent. At this moment, she really wanted to leave, but she couldn't. Her current status was equivalent to the Crown Prince of Dai Yu State. She had both power and influence. Whatever she wanted to do, she could achieve twice the results with half the effort. She did not want to give up. Moreover, if she left just like that, wouldn't it benefit Long Cheng's Ting Shui? What would happen to Gong Dai? The Emperor would not let him off. Even if he defeated the Emperor in the end, he would probably be cursed. Gong Che also said, Imperial sister, tell me. Why hurt yourself for an outsider? Gong Yimo turned back and gritted her teeth. Agree to anything? She looked at Gong Cheng suspiciously. Gong Cheng nodded repeatedly, yes, Moa. Tell me. She looked conflicted, as if she was in a difficult position. In the end, she stretched out 3 fingers. First, I want Imperial Father to not blame the Imperial Guards. They were brought up by Gong Dai, and they were worried about me. That's why they didn't listen to you. If you blame them, we won't talk about this anymore, she said softly. Gong Cheng was angry and amused. Originally, he was prepared to demote all of these people. Did he want to die by keeping disobedient people by his side? However, Gong Yimo did not look like she was joking. Forget it, forget it. At worst, he would find someone else to lead the Imperial Guards in the future. So he nodded. Second, you can't blame Gong Dai. Gong Yimo said seriously, Gong Dai did this for me. You can't blame him for the deep feelings between us. This made Gong Cheng a little hesitant. Because just a moment ago, he wanted to remove Gong Dai from his position first. It was too dangerous. With his influence in the Imperial Guards. But now, Gong Yimo asked him not to take action against Gong Dai. Wasn't this making things difficult for him? Which emperor could tolerate this? Gong Yimo naturally knew what he was thinking and said sadly, Imperial Father, you're too suspicious. That's why you suspect me when others say it. Whenever there's anything that you can't control, you want to kill me. She said the word kill very self-deprecatingly. She was referring to how she faked her death to escape. Now, you also suspect Gong Dai. She couldn't help but look up and ask, don't you know what kind of person I am? Don't you know how Gong Dai treats you? In your heart, have you really trusted anyone? Her tone was very fast and aggressive. It made Gong Cheng's ears buzz. He didn't trust anyone. Gong Yimo smiled and shook her head, the world slandered me, scolded me, humiliated me, and looked down on me. I don't feel uncomfortable. But even you don't believe me. What's the point of me staying here? Her words were very simple. But for so many years, No one had ever said this to Gong Cheng. As an emperor, he must think a lot and be suspicious. Does he need someone to truly trust? At this time, Gong Dai timely said, "Imperial father, I don't have the ambition to become an emperor. Now, at the altar, I swear on my life that in this life, I will not covet your throne." He just wants to be a prince that no one can control and then run away with royal sister. Gong Yimo and Gong Dai's words were a two-sided attack. Gong Cheng couldn't help but hold his head in pain. In the end, it was Chang Shi who gave in to him. "Your Majesty, the late emperor once said that an emperor should be good at using people, and should not be suspicious of using people. You see, these are all your children. Each and every one of them is well behaved. What else do you have to worry about? It's me who is too rigid." Gong Cheng suddenly opened his mouth. It was unknown whether he was telling others or telling himself. He gave a long sigh. "All right. Mo Jin agrees to the second matter." Gong Yimo smiled. "The third matter is that I want to personally send Long Cheng's Ting Shui back to her country." She said to everyone, "At this time, because of me, I should be the one to solve it. I won't cause discord between the two countries because of personal grudges. So, I will personally solve this matter." Gong Dai suddenly glanced at Gong Yimo, but didn't say anything. Gong Yimo's words were naturally what Gong Cheng wished for. "Good child, Jin agrees. It's just that Dai Yu State is in the right in this matter. You just need to seek justice. Even if we break off in the end, Jin and Dai Yu State are not afraid." "Thank you, Imperial Father, for your benevolence." Gong Cheng finally showed a trace of a tired smile. "In that case, Mo why aren't you wearing the ceremonial hat? And Che, you too. Do you think you can discard the crown prince just because you say so? If this happens again, Jin will definitely punish you severely. Now, wear the crown for Mo." Chapter 310. Gong Che looked at the golden crown in his hand and finally let out a sigh of relief. "Yes, father." He looked at Gong Yimo and his heart was once again filled with admiration for her. It was just like the first time he met her. She was like a demon overflowing with murderous aura, sitting motionless in the cold palace with corpses all over the ground and her little face stained with blood. She was so different from the rest. "Sister, this prince will put on the crown for you." Gong Yimo sighed and lowered her head. A wise man submits to circumstances. She was never a person who would act in a moment of anger. If there was a shortcut, why wouldn't she take it? Seeing that the murderous aura in her eyes had dissipated, she finally lowered her head. At that moment, she seemed to have returned to that docile and kind princess, and not the female Yama who seemed to be able to destroy heaven and earth when she was enraged. It was really strange. Why did it not feel strange when two completely different characteristics appeared on her? When the golden crown was put on her head, Gong Yimo heard cheers. She turned to look and felt that these people seemed to be happy from the bottom of their hearts. Compared to before, they showed two different expressions. At that moment, she seemed to have understood something. People were ignorant, and it was human nature to be biased. Since that was the case, why not be the one to guide their thoughts? In her previous life, she did not play with these thoughts, but not playing with them did not mean that she did not know how to. After putting on the ceremonial crown, she calmly looked around. At this moment, everyone was bowing down to worship her. At this moment, she smiled, as if there was a different kind of emotion in her heart. Then, she suddenly took off the largest Eastern pearl on her crown. Everyone was confused. At this moment, they heard her holding the pearl up high, closed her eyes and said, "Sacrifice to the heavens, receive benefits from the earth. Now that the Grand Canal has been formed, with the pearl as the seal, may this river flow forever, and the heavens bless the future generation." She was actually saying the oath that the holy maiden had to say during the conferring ceremony. She walked to the edge of the cliff and threw the pearl in her hand down. The pearl hit the stone wall and flashed a stream of light, making a dull sound, and then disappeared in an instant. That valuable pearl, just like that, disappeared into the surging Long Teng River. She closed her eyes and turned around with a smile. The conferring ceremony has been completed. Bestow the earth with a bright pearl, and the heavens bless the future. The name of this canal is Zi Tian. Her words caused joy to appear on the faces of the originally silent crowd. They bowed and kowtowed. The pearl seals the earth, and the heavens bless the future generations. Daiyu state is mighty. Prosper and prosper. Daiyu state is mighty. Prosper and prosper. His voice reverberated through the mountains like waves, causing everyone's hearts to surge. A sense of pride arose from patriotism and national honor. No matter what happened in the past, their mood now was rising, grateful and pious. Then, the ministers stood up and threw the pearls down the sky ladder one by one. The commoners threw down the little things they had made. There was food, and there were also things they loved. They all represented their feelings for the gods. When the last person finished, the thrilling ceremony finally came to an end. On the way back, Gong Yimo sat in the carriage with her eyes closed. At this time, her hand was simply bandaged. Although she had medicine in her space, she didn't know why she didn't apply it because she wanted it to hurt. At this time, someone suddenly entered her carriage. It gave Gong Yimo a fright. When she saw that it was Gong Dai, she felt her heart beat faster. Can't he restrain himself after what happened just now? Gong Dai knew that she was afraid, so he spoke first. It was the emperor who asked me to come. Perhaps it was out of guilt or to show his trust, but the emperor actually asked Gong Dai to comfort her. Gong Yimo didn't say anything and closed her eyes to rest. At this time, her face was a little pale and she was in a sorry state. There was a weak beauty to her that made Gong Dai want to hug her. However, she had just been agitated, so he couldn't do that. Just now, there was a moment when he thought of directly usurping the throne. The ministers and emperor were all there, and the imperial guards only listened to his orders. Once he gave the order, the imperial guards outside wouldn't have time to react, and he would be able to control the situation. Those who followed him would prosper, and those who opposed him would perish. With such a good opportunity, he could easily become the emperor. Moreover, if he didn't do it this time, it would be difficult to do it in the future. Even if the emperor didn't pursue the matter, he would be on guard against him. It wouldn't be so easy. However, he didn't do it because she wasn't willing, and because he didn't have any rebellious thoughts all this time, he missed this opportunity. She wasn't willing. She never had the ambition to annex any country, and she also had some feelings for the emperor. She felt that he was a good emperor, and there was no need for him to do such a thing for his own selfish reasons and cause unrest in the country. However, he was a little shaken at that moment. Previously, he only wanted to be a prince with real power and travel the world with her. But just now, when he saw Gong Yimo being bullied, he was in a dilemma. Why couldn't he be the emperor? If he became the emperor, he would definitely protect her. She could do whatever she wanted, and no one would dare to say anything. He just wanted to be with her. However, when he saw her bitterly arguing for the sake of her reputation without showing any desire to destroy everything, he couldn't help but suppress his thoughts and not do anything. There was no need for him to go to that step. That step would hurt her. The two of them didn't speak. At this moment, the carriage jolted, and Gong Yimo suddenly let out a muffled groan. Gong Dai saw that her wound was bleeding again. Although he didn't dare to touch her at this time, he couldn't bear to see her in pain. He took out a bottle of medicine and reached out to hold Gong Yimo's hand. "What are you doing?" She retracted her hand like a frightened rabbit. Because she had touched her wound, a thin layer of cold sweat appeared on her forehead, but she still looked at him warily. This reaction made his heart ache. He was still too weak. His influence was limited to Daiyu state. Whatever Lu Yi's people wanted to do, he had to be passive. That was why the current situation had happened, and why Gong Yimo was injured. He closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was a trace of determination in his cold eyes. "Royal sister, I won't touch you. I promise you that before I have absolute power, I won't force you anymore." His heart ached. He had finally forced her to this point, but because he couldn't bear to see her afraid, he had to give in. Gong Yimo looked at him blankly and spoke after a while. "Are you serious?" Gong Dai smiled with a pale face. She really couldn't take it anymore and only wanted to retreat. He touched the hair on her temples with his fingertips and pulled all the strands behind her head. "Really? But we have to make a promise." Gong Yimo opened her eyes and looked at him. At that moment, her guard gradually dropped. Gong Dai smiled bitterly. I want you to promise that you won't fall in love with anyone other than me. Can you do that? Chapter 3:11. Seeing that she didn't answer, Gong Dai pursed his lips, opened her injured palm, and lowered his head to apply medicine for her. At 16 years old, he was between maturity and inexperience. When he restrained all his hostility and calmed down to do something, he was simply harmless. However, Gong Yimo could feel that his heart was not calm at this moment, and it was stronger than ever. After applying the medicine, he carefully bandaged Gong Yimo's hand and calmly placed it on the cushion. Royal sister, I'm useless. No wonder you don't like me. As he said these words, he laughed silently. He actually laid sideways on Gong Yimo's lap, with a trace of self-loathing between his eyebrows. The self-deprecation and self-blame in his tone made Gong Yimo's heart suddenly hurt. How many years had it been since he was like this? Just like that, he lay on her lap quietly, with a trace of dependence and affection. Gong Yimo's hand couldn't help but fall on his crown, gently stroking his hair. You're already very outstanding. Gong Dai didn't say anything. His head gently rubbed against her leg, deeply inhaling the scent of her body, like an injured beast, quietly licking its wounds. Gong Yimo knew that he was hit by the incident with Ting Shui in Dragon City today. He realized that his power was only in one country, while she was already going to a second country. Was he a little sad? How old are you? Gong Dai hated it when she talked about him like this. He couldn't help but gently bite her thigh. That hot and itchy feeling made Gong Yimo let out a clear laugh. I'm serious. She pressed his head, not letting him move. In the past, Gong Dai had always been strong and aggressive. However, when he revealed such a quiet and hurt side for the first time, she finally couldn't help but speak her mind. In my heart, you've always been the most powerful man. Her words made Gong Dai suddenly stop moving. He quietly lay on her lap, listening to her speak. When you were very, very young, 7 years old, right? At that time, you could make a swing and a rocking chair for me. As long as I told you once, you could make it based on your own guesses. You didn't look like a 7-year-old child at all. You learned everything I taught you once. You were simply a child prodigy. Gong Dai was silent. He didn't think that having a photographic memory or being born with three-dimensional thinking was something amazing. If he was a child prodigy, then the royal sister who taught him these things was a god. Gong Yimo ran her fingers through his hair to massage the top of his head. She could clearly feel Gong Dai's entire body relax, and she couldn't help but smile. Also, when you were 9 years old, there was an assassin in the cold palace. I asked you to ask Imperial Father for help. At that time, I was actually prepared to stall the assassin and let you escape. At that time, I didn't think that you, who was only 9 years old, could really call for help. Gong Yimo smiled bitterly. There were some things that she didn't tell Gong Dai later on because Gong Dai felt very guilty about her injury, so she buried it in her heart, thinking that she would never talk about it in this lifetime. However, now, on the way back to the palace, she wanted to tell him. Gong Dai suddenly opened his eyes to look at her. Gong Yimo quickly covered his eyes and smiled awkwardly. Don't look. It's said that a woman's angle is the ugliest. Gong Dai's initial shock and heartache were swept away. He didn't know why, but he suddenly wanted to laugh. The royal sister actually cared a lot about her image in his heart. At that time, when I saw those assassins calling for help, I felt that I was going to die here. However, there were 2 of us, so one of us dying is definitely better than both of us dying. So I chased you away and asked you to look for the emperor. Actually, I hoped that the emperor would not kill you on account of you being his son and would protect you. Gong Yimo finished speaking in a low voice. Even she was a little surprised. At that time, she was actually so selfless that she wanted to give up her third life so easily, just so that Gong Dai could leave. Based on her understanding of the emperor, she knew that the emperor would definitely not kill Gong Dai. As long as he appeared in front of the emperor, he would be able to live. As for whether she would die or not, at that time, she really didn't think too much about it. When Gong Dai heard this, he couldn't help but reach out to hug her. His slender body curled up on the couch, the tip of his nose pressed against the softness of her abdomen, and he sighed deeply. How could he not be afraid? At that time, he was really afraid that if he couldn't find help, then she would die. Later on, he didn't dare to think about what would have happened if he hadn't seen the Emperor at that time. If she had died at that time because she wanted to save him, and he was powerless to save her, he really couldn't imagine what his life would be like in the future. Feeling that he was hugging her in fear because he was recalling the past, Gong Yimo giggled. Suddenly, she felt as if she had returned to the cold palace, the feeling of relying on each other. You might not know, but at that time, if you hadn't arrived in time, the one who would have died would have been me. At that time, I had already used up all my strength, and I might have been stabbed into a sieve by those assassins in the next moment, but you came. Not only did you pass through the layers of palace defenses to see the Emperor, you really brought people to save me. At that moment, I really thought that you were super powerful, and didn't seem like a 9-year-old child at all. At that time, I swore that I would definitely treat you well because my life was saved by you. So even though I was about to faint at that time, I bit the tip of my tongue and endured it. I wanted to fight for our lives. Luckily, we both survived. Gong Dai couldn't hold it in anymore and hugged her to the couch. In Gong Yimo's carriage, there was a very big couch that they could sleep on. But Gong Dai didn't do anything, he just hugged her and rested his head on her neck, absorbing every bit of gentleness from her body. This was the person he loved to the marrow of his bones. The neck was also a sensitive spot, but because Gong Dai didn't move, Gong Yimo laughed and hugged his back, looking at the top of the carriage, and continued speaking. Later on, you were also very powerful. I'm not a person who likes to scheme, but bringing you along probably affected you. I don't think you're the kind of person who would take the initiative to scheme against others. Your heart is still righteous, it's just that you think you're unscrupulous. But in my eyes, compared to her previous life, she was much kinder. She coughed a few times and continued speaking. In my eyes, you're already very good. Even if you don't admit it, but in your heart, there's a sense of justice and kindness. This point can be seen from the fact that you've never harmed any of the upright officials. Very good, this point is very similar to me. Gong Dai was so angry that he bit her neck. That moment of numbness stunned both of them. The air seemed to heat up, causing Gong Yimo's face to turn slightly red, which was very charming. Chapter 312. Gong Yimo looked at him nervously. Seeing that he didn't act rashly, she sighed softly and continued. Look at how well you did in Shi province. I only gave you a chance, but not only did you gain the approval of the people, you also accomplished a great deed. Even the Emperor approved of you. Furthermore, you single-handedly disrupted Lu Yi's scheme, preventing the border from being plunged into chaos. Do you know, if it weren't for a freak combination of factors, once the war broke out, even if I didn't want to, I would have been forced to hand over the explosives. But if I didn't want to hand them over, I would have been condemned for eternity. So I'm very grateful to you. You're really amazing. Gong Yimo sometimes thought that if she hadn't been so high-profile and shone so brightly, the one who would have gained the approval of the people would definitely have been Gong Dai, because she had lived 3 lives, but Gong Dai was still a teenager. When he started his business in Shi province, he was really 13. He was still a month away from being 14. Hearing Gong Yimo's praise, Gong Dai didn't feel proud. At this moment, he hugged Gong Yimo and his mind was blank. He just wanted to savor this moment of warmth. But when he heard that he had unintentionally helped Gong Yimo, he still felt proud and happy. The previous haze had long disappeared, leaving only joy. There was a very pleasant smell on him. It was very cold and refreshing. Gong Yimo suddenly felt moved. This was Gong Dai. After we returned to Daiyu State, you protected me and faced the pressure of the entire country alone. You faced assassination attempts from all directions. When I left later, you bitterly said that you weren't capable enough. Actually, I don't think so. She spoke softly in his ear. At that time, no one could protect me, not to mention you, who was only 14 years old. You gave yourself too much pressure and always felt that it wasn't enough. But I felt that you were very outstanding and had long surpassed all the men in the world. Later on, you opened Zhao prison, trained the private army, controlled the imperial army, and took over the bank despite the objections of the masses. Everything you did, you were already much stronger than the others. I also know that you held back today because I didn't want the Dai Yu state to fall into chaos. I held back because I wanted to. It's not your fault that you respected my choice. You guessed right. I don't want you to rebel. You should be a carefree prince for the rest of your life, a prince who stands at the top of the world with real power. You and I both know in our hearts that once the banks in the 4 countries are established and we have cooperation, your power will be earth-shattering. You feel disappointed now only because you are anxious because of me. You feel that you can't control foreign countries. But once the banks are spread throughout the 4 countries, your power will undergo an earth-shattering change. At that time, you will be the strongest man. I may be a little stronger than you now, but you and I both know that you will soon surpass me. When Gong Dai heard this, he suddenly lifted his head to look at her. His eyes were clear and bright, with a hint of water in them. They were as pure as those of a deer when they were young. Gong Yimo couldn't help but smile as she reached out to touch his face. That's why. Don't be discouraged. You have a long road ahead of you. Don't be anxious because of me and mess up the steps. You are still a few months away from 17, right? Why give yourself so much pressure? I am already prepared to be surpassed by you. Seeing that Gong Dai still didn't say anything, Gong Yimo suddenly had an idea. She smiled and promised. I promise, before you become super powerful, I will never fall in love with another man. Her lips were suddenly sealed, and her eyes widened. Gong Dai, this rascal, actually dared to kiss her again. However, Gong Dai, who had been very obedient just a moment ago, now ignored her struggles and became aggressive again. He kissed her again and again, exploring everything about her. Their lips and teeth intertwined. Both of their hearts were beating very fast, as if they didn't belong to them. Although she knew that she shouldn't indulge, at this moment, Gong Yimo didn't know if it was because of fatigue or something else, but she felt that her brain was lacking oxygen. Her resistance was very weak, and in the end, it was as if she was just twisting her body under him, passively accepting his kisses. As for Gong Dai, he effortlessly broke through her teeth and kissed her deeply. She couldn't resist all of this. In the end, Gong Yimo felt as if she had turned into spring water, and Gong Dai kissed her until her lips were swollen. Only then did he let go of her, panting, and stop. The tips of their noses were touching, and their eyes were covered with a layer of water. I don't need your promise anymore. Gong Yimo was kissed until she felt weak. At this moment, she stared at him with a pair of watery eyes. She didn't know what he was referring to. Her appearance almost made Gong Dai turn into a wolf. However, he gritted his teeth and endured it. He said in a low voice, "Royal sister, do whatever you want to do. I will catch up to you, and soon surpass you. I will have you openly, and I won't force you to make such a promise. I'm confused. I'm so strong. Who else would you choose other than me?" This was the first time he smiled, revealing his white teeth. His hand gently pinched the tender flesh on her face, and his eyebrows were raised. He smiled a little smugly. Gong Yimo pouted and slapped his hand away. Stop fooling around. However, Gong Dai didn't agree. He kissed Gong Yimo's face again, and even rubbed against it like a big cat. No, you're going to Lu Yi. How long has it been since we last saw each other? Gong Yimo laughed. It's only a few months. What's there to not be able to endure? Gong Dai nibbled on her ear and said, not even for a day. This low and hoarse voice drilled into her ears, tickling her, causing her heart to start thumping again. Her face blushed even more. It really made Gong Dai want to eat her up right now, and then rebel. Every day when I wake up, I think about when I'll eat you up, from the inside out. His hand dangerously hooked onto the edge of her collar. With a gentle tug, she would be perfectly displayed in front of him. Gong Yimo quickly grabbed her collar and glared at him. Her eyes were still misty, and her cheeks were flushed. That look was even more flirtatious, and it made Gong Dai's bones go soft. He couldn't help but lean forward again, and while tightly controlling her small hand that was about to resist, he hugged her and kissed her again and again, taking advantage of her. There was one thing he didn't point out. because he was afraid that royal sister would be shy and ignore him. That was. He could feel that this time, her hand that was resisting him was weak. She didn't resist him. Could it be said that she was also enjoying their skin contact? This knowledge made him happy again. If it wasn't for the fact that the timing wasn't right, he really wanted to hug her and not let go. Chapter 313. But this road was destined to have an end. After entering the palace, Gong Yimo was given special permission to rest, while Long Chengting Shui was grounded, and Gong Dai was called away by the emperor. Looking at Gong Dai's departing figure, her footsteps became lighter. She, who was originally upset and regretful because of her soft heart, suddenly didn't feel so regretful. She had been resisting, but she was about to leave. Before leaving, she followed her heart and was a little presumptuous for once. She wasn't sure where the road ahead of her was, so naturally, she wouldn't think too much about it. She would just look at the present. She didn't go to rest, but went to find Kim Yoon. At this time, Kim Yoon was sitting at the desk. His whole person was bewildered and his face was ugly. When he heard that Gong Yimo was here, for the first time, he didn't feel surprised, but guilty. Gong Yimo smiled at him. What's wrong? Today, I successfully turned things around and slapped Long Chengting Shui's face. You don't seem happy. After Gong Yimo came in, she didn't treat herself as an outsider and directly sat on his desk. Kim Yoon looked at her and was silent for a long time. Moa had always been like this. No matter how big the matter was, she would always be indifferent to it. She would never talk about how much trouble she had caused by doing what she had done today, nor would she complain about how much humiliation she had suffered. She always smiled like this, as if nothing could be difficult for her. But hurt was hurt, and Kim Yoon deeply blamed himself. He closed his eyes and said, Actually, Long Chengting Shui wanted to make a move on you. I knew. After saying this, Gong Yimo didn't react. He opened his eyes and saw Gong Yimo smiling, as if she didn't hear him. He really could never understand her thoughts. At that time, she came to me to cooperate, saying that she thought of a way to break you and Gong Dai apart. At that time, I rejected her. Kim Yoon looked out of the window and said faintly, but I didn't know her plan. I didn't know that she would make a move on you today, or use such a despicable method. The altar of worship was such a sacred place. She had indeed been punished by the heavens for what she had done. At this moment, he looked at Gong Yimo again and sighed deeply. His eyelids drooped, and even the enchanting mole under his eye dimmed. But I didn't tell you. If I had told you, you would have guarded against her and wouldn't have been so passive. He couldn't continue. In front of Gong Yimo, he felt that even the slightest bit of his ugly thoughts would be magnified infinitely. That day, he went to look for Gong Yimo to tell her. But for some reason, he forgot about it when he saw her. When he heard her rejecting him, he had his own thoughts. He smiled bitterly. I had hoped that she would succeed in getting Gong Dai, then I would have a chance. But I didn't expect that her method was to suppress you to achieve her own goal. Because of my selfishness, today, I've let you suffer. However, at that time, he couldn't do anything. The more he tried to explain, the worse it would get. He lowered his head deeply. After being together for a few years, he knew where Moa's weakness was. Today's incident must have hurt her. Will you hate me? Gong Yimo chuckled. Kim Yoon looked up in surprise. His forehead was knocked by Gong Yimo with the book on the table. You think too highly of me. Even if I know that Long Chengting Shui has bad intentions towards me, I can't guess what she wants to do. I'm not a deity. But Kim Yoon knew that Gong Yimo was just saying that to ease his mind. No buts. Gong Yimo raised her eyebrows and winked at him. If you really feel sorry for me, why don't you go and sign the bank's contract? Kim Yoon heard that and looked bitter. You really can do anything for Gong Dai. Gong Yimo couldn't deny it and said earnestly, Kim Yoon, we are friends, brother and sister, but we won't be lovers. I've always said it very clearly. I hope you can respect me. These words were like a bayonet, stabbing Kim Yoon's heart into pain. He looked at Gong Yimo, deeply looking at her. I will sign the contract, but Moa. You taught me a lot before, but you never taught me to give up, so Gong Yimo looked at him, her expression inexplicably sympathetic as she interrupted him. There are many things that people are helpless in this life. Not everything will go as you wish. You said that I taught you a lot, so now, I'll teach you one last lesson. Don't waste time on impossible things, do what you should do. After saying that, Gong Yimo couldn't bear to look at Kim Yoon's expression. She just said faintly, go back. Yu Heng needs you, and I have to go to Lu Yi. I only hope that the next time we meet, you and I can go back to how we were before. After saying that, she turned and left. The moment she left, she really felt that she couldn't bear it. It wasn't because of love, but because of his sadness and the ties of 2 lifetimes. He was very good to her, and she didn't want to make him sad. But she couldn't reciprocate his feelings. Instead of dragging it out and letting him feel that he still had a chance to continue being in pain, it was better to cut the Gordian knot. Now, she only hoped that time would smooth out everything, and when they met again, they could still be friends like before. A few days later, above the imperial city. Moa, are you really leaving now? The sky was gloomy. Gong Che looked at Lu Yi and the others, who didn't look good. He frowned and asked, why don't you wait until after Imperial Father's birthday? Gong Yimo smiled and said, Brother Crown Prince, Dai Yu State is celebrating, and so is Lu Yi. This year, I'll spend it in Lu Yi. I'll also see how the people there celebrate. Seeing that Gong Yimo had made up her mind, Gong Che was reluctant, but he couldn't say anything. After all, Gong Dai was standing there obediently without saying anything. Although it was a little strange. Gong Yimo said goodbye to the Emperor, Empress, and the others. Then, she said goodbye to Kim Yoon. Looking at him today, his expression was much better than the other day. Although she didn't know what he was thinking, this was the first time he smiled from the bottom of his heart. Moa, be careful on the road. I'll be delayed for a few days because of my contract, but I'll be leaving soon. I should be leaving after attending Dai Yu State's birthday banquet. In the future. He thought for a long time. A trace of sadness flashed across his beautiful eyes. In the future, I hope to see you often. Gong Yimo smiled and patted him on the shoulder. You'll have the chance. I also wish you a safe journey back home. I'm leaving, don't miss me. Finally, she walked in front of Gong Dai. Gong Dai reached out to gather her thick cloak. His cold eyes were filled with gentleness. He said in a low voice, when we reach Lu Yi, be careful. If there are any problems, let me know immediately. Don't always try to be brave. Understand? Gong Yimo looked at him, her eyes curved into a smile, and her tone was slightly emotional. I know. Take care. No one said a word as they watched Gong Yimo leave. Gong Cheng looked worried. Moa brought too few people this time, but she insisted on only bringing 50 people. He didn't know what would happen when they reached Lu Yi. Chapter 314. Lu Yi had about 50 envoys, and there were even more people in the dowry delivery team. Including the guards, there were more than 1,000 people. Therefore, Gong Yimo was at a disadvantage in terms of numbers with only 50 people. However, these 50 people were carefully selected by Gong Dai. It was no exaggeration to say that every one of them was outstanding. Originally, the little princess of Dai Yu State had started to cause trouble the moment they left. However, after Gong Yimo's subordinates displayed their strength, Lu Yi's people became obedient. As for Lu Yi's envoy, Buji, he had the biggest headache. Everything was going well, and they could have returned after delivering the dowry. However, their little princess had to persecute another princess on such an important day in Dai Yu State. As a result, she had to be sent back to her country. The little princess might not be affected, but those of them who followed her would not have a good ending. However, since Dai Yu State had already made this decision, there was nothing they could say. Therefore, they were all dejected along the way. The entire team was silent. Princess, we're about to leave seclusion, someone said to Gong Yimo. At this moment, she was riding on a horse with her hair tied behind her head. She was looking into the distance with a calm expression. She looked like she had her own thoughts. It was very eye-catching. We'll set up camp here tonight. Tomorrow, we'll cross the border and go to Yuheng. Seeing that it was getting late, Gong Yimo gave this order. However, Longcheng's Ting Shui did not listen. Why should we stop? Isn't it better to go to Yuheng tonight? I don't want to sleep in such a place. During this period, Longcheng's Ting Shui's temper had been getting worse. Her demands had never been met. She had never been so aggrieved in her life. The envoy saw that Gong Yimo's people were already setting up camp in front of them. She had her reasons for doing this. He was no match for her, so why couldn't he just swallow his pride? His silence agitated Longcheng's Ting Shui even more. Trash. I really don't know what Imperial Brother sees in you. When we return, I'll definitely ask Imperial Brother to punish you severely. Trash. Her expression was ferocious. Then, she angrily flung the curtain aside and ignored him. After being humiliated like this, even Boogie, who had a good temper, was a little angry at this moment. If she hadn't done such a thing as soon as she went to Daiyu State, would he have come in such a grand manner only to leave with his tail between his legs? However, this matter could not be reasoned with. Once he gave the order, the people behind him also began to set up camp. The entire process was very quiet. Later, only the sound of Ting Shui in Long City complaining about how bad the food was could be heard. However, Gong Yimo didn't care at all. She only looked in the direction of Yuheng, deep in thought. Now that she has the clearance letter from Kim Yoon in her hand, she is not afraid of being stopped by Bianjiang. However, Yuheng still has Yunjin. She doesn't know if she has become better after what happened last time. Has she become more restrained, or has she become crazier? That was why she didn't act rashly and set up camp outside the pass. At night, the frontier fortress was very cold. However, Gong Yimo and the others were all highly skilled in martial arts. Naturally, they were not afraid. However, the people on Lu Yi's side were more miserable. Most of them slept restlessly. Suddenly, Gong Yimo opened her eyes. At the same time, there was the sound of swords being unsheathed outside the tent. The moment she walked out of the tent, she saw the person at first glance. She heard the commotion and the screams of women from Lu Yi's side. Gong Yimo calmly looked at Qiu Xingfeng, whose eyes were bloodshot with anger. She raised her hand and stopped everyone. Gong Yimo. Qiu Xingfeng's sword shook slightly. The two guards in front of him were forced back a few steps. He walked towards Gong Yimo step by step. His murderous aura made everyone on guard. However, because Gong Yimo didn't say anything, they didn't dare to act rashly. Gong Yimo saw his sword coming towards her. She stepped forward and directly clamped down on his raised hand. You're here to take revenge on me? Because I killed Long Hanyang? A cold light flashed through her eyes. That low voice strangely suppressed half of Qiu Xingfeng's anger. He didn't know why, but when he faced Gong Yimo, he always felt powerless. Why did you kill her? Qiu Xingfeng's clear eyes were filled with sadness and anger. The originally calm temperament was also destroyed by this anger. Only killing intent was left. Gong Yimo looked up and smiled at him. This person was her master who was willing to die for her in her previous life. However, in this life, he wanted to kill her for another person. How ironic. She flung away his hand that was holding the sword. She picked up a strand of hair and twirled it at her fingertips. She asked softly, "You're here to kill me. But did you ask clearly why I killed her?" She took a step closer to Qiu Xingfeng. Her voice was even softer. She was here to kill me, but I killed her instead. She can only blame herself for not being as skilled as others. Or is there such a rule in Mount Yun Ding that only members of the sect can kill, but others can't kill members of the sect? At the end, she smiled faintly with a trace of mockery. Her words made Qiu Xingfeng speechless. He wasn't very intelligent. When he heard that Long Hanyang died in Gong Yimo's hands, he was already unable to suppress his grief. He only wanted to kill Gong Yimo to vent his anger. However, now that he heard her say that it was his disciple who started it first, he felt that the sword in his hand seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. He couldn't lift it anymore. But why didn't you just kill her? Why did you burn her body? Do you hate her so much that you couldn't wait to burn her to ashes? As if he had found a reason for his behavior, he became unyielding again. His eyes were red, like an injured little beast. Do you think that I burned her because I hated her to the core and wanted to burn her to ashes? Gong Yimo shook her head with a smile. Wouldn't it be better to burn her to ashes? Do you really think that there will be a soul that can enter the underworld and be reincarnated after being buried? Although she had experienced it twice, Gong Yimo didn't think that what happened to her was the manifestation of the gods. She didn't believe that there would be an underworld and an afterlife. Qiu Xingfeng was even more infuriated by her twisted logic. He clenched the sword in his hand so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Don't you feel afraid? You killed so many people. Don't you feel afraid every night in your dreams? Qiu Xingfeng naturally couldn't understand her because he had never killed anyone in his life. However, Gong Yimo's hands must have been stained with blood. Aren't you afraid of the nightmares? Gong Yimo's smile froze. She looked at Qiu Xingfeng and suddenly said with a serious face, "If you want to fight, then let's fight. If you can kill me, that's your ability." As she said this, a hidden blade slid down from her hand, and the two of them leapt towards the open space outside the camp. During this process, they had already exchanged many moves. The two of them had serious expressions, and their moves were very fast. Qiu Xingfeng's moves were much fiercer than last time. However, Gong Yimo's moves were very smooth and casual, but she had the upper hand. You don't know her position in my heart. You don't know. Chapter 315. Gong Yimo was stunned, and Qiu Xingfeng's sword cut off a strand of her hair. He went forward again, and Gong Yimo quickly used her hidden blade to block his sword. At that moment, there seemed to be sparks. You don't know. When she was young, she was so little. She didn't like other people, so she pestered me and called me master. You don't know what she meant to me. His tone was deep. It wasn't hatred towards Gong Yimo, but self-reproach. As her master, he didn't protect her well. His words hit Gong Yimo's ears. At that moment, she felt her heart twitch, and it hurt fiercely. She never thought that killing Long Hanyang would make Qiu Xingfeng so sad. His grief seemed to be tangible. I fed her, I dressed her, I played with her, I accompanied her as she grew up. When she grew up, although she didn't like to play with me anymore, she was still my disciple. But you killed her. Qiu Xingfeng knew clearly that Long Hanyang had always treated him like a servant. When they grew up, she despised him more and more. She despised him for having the intelligence of a 10-year-old. But there were times when she was good to him. At least she was always with him. His senses were very sharp. He knew that, but he still treated her well. Maybe it was because of this that she didn't reject him. When they grew up, she was still willing to call him master. That was enough. Who asked her to be his little disciple? Gong Yimo heard his words, and her soul shook. In the end, his sword brushed past her shoulder, leaving a shallow wound. But she didn't feel it. She just looked at Qiu Xingfeng with an expression that he couldn't understand. She was really touched. Did he really side with whoever was with him? But when she was with him, she did better than Long Hanyang. Because she came from another world, she knew how to take care of her master, who was older than her, from a young age. Just for the friendship that he had brought her out of the palace. When he was mocked by the other brothers and refused to eat, she fed him. When he was exhausted from training, she was the one who helped him change his clothes. She played with him, taught him the basic ways of the world, and grew up with him. Even when someone insulted him verbally, she would still stand up and scold them back. He was clean and sincere, and she reciprocated with more sincerity. But she didn't expect that in this life, everything was reverse. He wanted to kill her for a girl that he had taken care of since she was a child. Even if she told herself in her heart that one life was another life, life couldn't be confused. But when he really pointed his sword at her, her heart would still hurt. It wasn't as simple as she thought. Letting go of the only good thing in her previous life. The process was as painful as a slow knife cutting meat. Qiu Xingfeng found it very strange that Gong Yimo's strength was not as good as his own, but he didn't think about the reason. He only wanted to kill her. To avenge his little disciple. Even if Yang was wrong, he would still kill Gong Yimo. If he killed her, he himself, of himself, Ants of himself. He of him. Thinking. He of his of his of his of his of his. He seemed to have made up his mind to kill her. Gong Yimo's body was cut by him a few times. She was angry, in pain, in shock, and in hatred. At this time, Qiu Xingfeng slashed down with his sword and knocked Gong Yimo's sword away. When he slashed down again, Gong Yimo caught it with her bare hands. Her hand was still wrapped in gauze, but because of her violent emotions, her internal strength was attached to her hand. Like a fried dough twist, she twisted his treasured sword together. In the next moment, she closed in on him. Qiu Xingfeng didn't expect that the sword in his hand that had been tempered thousands of times would be so fragile in front of her, and Gong Yimo was only half an arm away from him. Her hand was claw-like in front of his chest. At that moment, he really felt that Gong Yimo wanted to dig out his heart. Blood dripped down. Gong Yimo held the sword in her hand. Even with the protection of her internal strength, she was still injured. But she wasn't afraid at all. She stared at him fiercely. Why? Madness flashed in her eyes. Every time she met Qiu Xingfeng, she had a feeling of impulsiveness and wanted to destroy the world. She only treated you as a servant, and you remembered her for your whole life. What about me? We were together for 13 years. How could you forget about me so cleanly? Did you forget who stood in front of you and said that he would protect you? Did you forget that you didn't like to eat cucumbers and were afraid that master would blame you, so you let me eat them all? Did you forget who mended your clothes for you when they were torn? Even if you forgot everything. Her eyes were red, and her voice was filled with grief and anger. Even if you forgot everything, you should at least remember that you stood against everyone, including Yunding Mountain, for me. You should at least remember that you died for me. How could you forget everything, forget everything? As she spoke, her other hand was exerting force. Her 5 fingers dug deep into his chest, as if she really wanted to dig out his heart. That kind of hatred, that kind of sorrowful cry, was like a trapped beast that couldn't be released. She knew that she was being unreasonable. How could Qiu Xingfeng remember what happened in his last life? But he didn't remember. He came to kill her, but how could she, who remembered everything, do it? Kill him like she did to the others? Could he do it? She couldn't do it. Qiu Xingfeng was stunned by her words. He didn't understand what she was saying. What did she mean by she was with him for 13 years? Wasn't it Yang who was with him all the time? What did she mean by dying for her? Was this girl crazy? But his senses were so sharp. Gong Yimo's heavy grief wasn't faked. It made him hallucinate that there would be a person who would helplessly take away all the cucumbers in his bowl when the divine venerable turned around. She would coax the master to forgive him when he did something wrong. No, this wasn't his memory. This scene didn't happen. He came to kill her to avenge Yang. But the sword was destroyed, and so was his anger. He couldn't do it, and he didn't even know the reason. Gong Yimo gradually calmed down. Even though she knew clearly that a person who wanted to kill her couldn't be left alive. Maybe the lack of intelligence made people stubborn. Maybe Qiu Xingfeng would still kill her next time. However, when she pressed her hand on his chest, she could feel that his heart was in a mess. He was actually affected by her accusation just now. Her knuckles turned white, but she couldn't press down. In the end, she had to take a step back and give up. The girl who seemed to want to tear him apart just now seemed to be his hallucination. Now she lowered her head slightly and was quiet, even with a trace of coldness. I'll say it again. Long Hanyang wanted to kill me. Even if I have to do it all over again, I'll still kill her. Her voice was heavy with a trace of coldness. You can take revenge, but the next time you want to kill me, I'll definitely kill you. After that, she turned around and left. The cold wind blew her clothes up. There were still people waiting for her in the camp. Chapter 316. When Gong Yimo returned to the campsite, she was unable to catch her breath. At this time, the campsite was divided into 2 groups, Lu Yi's people and Dai Yu State's people. The 2 groups were facing each other, and from the looks of it, they seemed to have fought just now. Seeing that she had returned safely, Long Chengting Shue's expression twisted for a moment. At this time, Gong Yimo was injured, but her injuries didn't look serious, and there wasn't much blood. "What's going on? Are you welcoming me back?" Gong Yimo asked airily. At this time, an imperial guard hurriedly handed her water and a handkerchief. Gong Yimo sat on the wooden shelf that was used to store luggage. She used the water from the water bottle to wash her wounds, and temporarily wrapped them with a handkerchief. When she was doing these actions, the people on both sides of the bonfire watched quietly. They watched as she cleaned her wounds without a frown. She was so calm that it was as if she had done this thousands of times. Even Long Chengting Shui, who had always disliked her, seemed to be stunned by her faint aura and couldn't speak for a long time. "Someone come and explain the reason." After Gong Yimo tidied up a little, she calmly ordered Lu Yi's people. At a glance, it was obvious that Long Chengting Shui was the one who started this. She wanted to ask why. Seeing that Buji was still in a daze, Long Chengting Shui angrily glared at him. She stood up and said, "This consort doesn't want to go with you. You have so many enemies. This consort doesn't want to be implicated." Gong Yimo sat there lazily and raised her eyebrows at her. "Then what do you want?" Her tone was indifferent, as if she didn't care about her at all. This made Long Chengting Shui even angrier. She smiled deeply. "Nothing. I just want to separate from you so that I won't be implicated by you." Gong Yimo smiled. "Separate?" She looked at Long Chengting Shui's gloomy little face. "Then you'll return to the country first and kill me at Lu Yi's gate? Or you'll go to King Lu Yi to complain about me? You want me to become a prisoner the moment I go?" Gong Yimo's words made the little princess's face turn ugly. She did think so, but she didn't expect Gong Yimo to see through her so easily. At this time, someone handed over a cup of hot water for Gong Yimo to warm her body. She took a sip and asked softly, "Also, what right do you have to negotiate with me? Do you really know who you are? This princess is Lu Yi's princess." Gong Yimo laughed out loud. "You're wrong." She stopped laughing. "You fought with me, and you lost. In my eyes, you're a captive. Princess of Dai Yu State, don't go too far." Buji had to stand up for his country's dignity. He immediately shielded Long Chengting Shui behind him. "Going too far?" Gong Yimo asked, a little puzzled. "Winner takes all. I heard that Lu Yi always speaks with his strength. If you're not convinced, just defeat me. But if you make me unhappy again, I don't mind letting you know what it means to go too far." Long Chengting Shui couldn't take this heavy humiliation. Her eyes reddened, and she ran back to her carriage. Even if Buji was angry, there was nothing he could do. People had to bow their heads under someone else's roof. He didn't understand what Gong Yimo was thinking. Was it good for her to offend the little princess like this? She still had to go to Lu Yi. If she really offended the little princess, what good would it do for her to stay in Lu Yi? She probably didn't know how much the little princess was doted on by Lu Yi. With a sigh, Bugi left as well. They were unlucky. Gong Yimo didn't speak so harshly, but what happened just now still affected her and put her in a bad mood. At this time, looking at the Imperial Guards, she suddenly remembered that they were all Gong Dai's spies. This trip to Lu Yi will take at least a few months, at most half a year. "You are all people that Gong Dai picked for me. Do you know who your master is?" The Imperial Guards looked at each other, not knowing what Gong Yimo meant. Wasn't the relationship between the princess and His Highness always very good? Gong Yimo sighed. "Forget it, it's nothing. But tonight's matter, you can't tell Gong Dai. Violators." She lowered her eyes and used her strength, turning the entire cup into powder. "There's such a cup." Everyone was shocked by Gong Yimo's move. In their hearts, they had a clearer idea of Gong Yimo's strength. "We obey." Gong Yimo nodded in satisfaction and went back to rest. She didn't know what would happen when she went to Yuheng the next day. The shortest distance from Dai Yu State to Lu Yi was to cross Yuheng. In this way, they would definitely pass by the capital city of Yuheng. Along the way, because of Kim Yoon's letter, they had a smooth journey. When they reached the capital city, Gong Yimo felt that something was wrong. Almost immediately, she made a decision. That was to let the Imperial Guards take Lu Yi and his men first. She would be separated from the rest for a period of time until they successfully passed through the capital city of Yuheng. The Imperial Guards General, Sikong, received the order and left without asking. Gong Yimo followed behind from a distance. She could feel that someone was secretly spying on her. She pursed her lips and smiled. Seeing that the large group had successfully passed through the capital city and exited the city gates, Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. She was about to sneak out when she was stopped by someone. The other party looked familiar. One look and she knew that they were Yun Guifei's people. No wonder she felt that someone was watching her from the beginning. It wasn't an illusion. Your Highness, please come with us. Gong Yimo raised her brows slightly. Tell her that I'm very busy and not free. However, the other party didn't give up. He frowned and said, this matter is very important. It concerns the second prince. Please help us, Your Highness. Gong Yimo raised her brows slightly. You want to use Kim Yoon to trick me? Dream on. It's not like that. A trace of reluctance appeared on that person's face. Seeing that Gong Yimo was stubborn, he could only hurriedly say, it concerns the second prince's background. Someone claims to be the second prince's father. By now, the news might have reached the second prince's hands, but it's beyond his reach. Gong Yimo's expression changed a few times. Wasn't Kim Yoon's father Jin Sheng? What the hell was this extra person? She wondered if this was Yoon Jin's scheme. After thinking for a moment, Kim Yoon's safety still prevailed. She stroked her chin. All right, I'll go with you. That person's expression relaxed. Thank you, Your Highness. Just like that, Gong Yimo was dressed up and changed her appearance to enter the Yuheng Palace. Coming in again, it really felt like a lifetime had passed. Before she even reached Yun Guifei's bedroom, she saw layers of security. Yun Guifei, who had always been able to get whatever she wanted, was actually being watched. It seemed that many things had happened after Kim Yoon left this time. That person brought Gong Yimo in through the back door. From afar, they could hear Jin Sheng's exhausted and angry voice. How dare you betray me? I'll kill you. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.